Welcome back, Legends. It's your boy Chronos, and today, we're diving into part 3 of What If Deku Had Yuta's abilities. You guys have been absolutely crushing it with your support, and I can't thank you enough for keeping this journey alive. A huge shout out to ＤISCLAIMER, the genius behind this series. Make sure to support them because they deserve it. Let's set the bar high. Smash that like button and help us hit 100 likes for the next chapter. If you're new here, hit subscribe and join the Legend Squad for top-tier anime content. Buckle up, because this is about to get wild. Chapter 5, The Narcissistic Sorcerer Suguru Ghetto. Morning, present time. The lush greenery enveloping the building enhanced its beauty and created a serene atmosphere. Towering trees and vibrant flowers framed the structure, crafting a picturesque scene that beckoned visitors to pause, reflect, and admire. The building itself was a remarkable sight, boasting multiple levels that seamlessly blended various architectural styles. A grand staircase, adorned with elegant railings, gracefully ascended to the entrance, inviting exploration and curiosity. The facade was punctuated by large windows that provided glimpses of the bright, airy rooms within while fostering a seamless connection with the outdoors. The softly sloped roof, painted a gentle shade of green, contributed to the edifice's majestic allure. Flanking the entrance, decorative pillars added an air of grandeur, while the meticulous detailing above the doorway showcased an intriguing mix of traditional and contemporary design elements. Together, all these features created a stunning tableau that captured the attention of anyone who passed by. Inside, two women stood on a polished wooden floor, captivated by a small red object resting on tatami mats. The room was enveloped in a warm glow from its yellow walls adorned with simple patterns, and the sliding paper doors invited in soft, diffused light. The women wore expressions of surprise and contemplation as they focused intently on the red object, hinting at its potential significance in the unfolding story. Upon closer inspection, the red object revealed itself to be a small, ornate box. Its deep crimson hue starkly contrasted with the pale tatami, drawing the eye like a drop of blood on pristine snow. Intricate golden designs danced across its surface, suggesting hidden meaning and secrets within. "Good afternoon, ladies," came a smooth voice from the doorway as Ghetto entered the room, his dark robes swishing softly against the tatami mats. With a casual grace, he leaned his elbow on the red box resting on a low table. His eyes closed and a chillingly wide smile spread across his face, adding an unsettling air to the atmosphere. "So, you think your daughter is cursed, right, Miss Sato?" Ghetto asked, his voice oozing with a feigned sweetness that sent a chill through the room. The older woman shifted in her seat, her fingers tightly clasped in her lap, betraying her discomfort. "Yes, but, my name is Saito," she corrected, her voice wavering slightly as if she were tiptoeing on thin ice. Ghetto's smile remained fixed, a mask of insincerity as he replied, "Nope, you're Sato. Sato is better. That's what I decided." His tone was authoritative, leaving no room for dissent. A nervous laugh escaped Sato's lips, barely concealing the bead of sweat that trickled down her temple. The tension in the air was palpable as she glanced toward her daughter, who sat beside her, a young brunette with deep worry lines etched across her forehead. "Mom, let's go," she urged in a hushed voice, tugging at her mother's sleeve. Her eyes darted back and forth between Ghetto's unsettling presence and the exit, fueled by instinct rather than logic. Saito turned to her daughter, an echo of concern lacing her voice. "But you've been losing sleep. The nightmares, the strange occurrences. We need help." Her words were heavy with desperation, underscoring the turmoil that plagued their nights. The brunette shook her head emphatically, her voice rising in intensity. "This has to be a scam. Look at him. He can't even get your name right." Her glare directed at Ghetto was fierce, but he only chuckled softly, unperturbed, his smile unwavering like a predator toying with its prey. Leaning forward, Ghetto's demeanor shifted. His expression turned softer, almost hypnotic. "It's almost as if you've forgotten how to breathe," he murmured, his intense gaze locked onto the brunette. His words hung in the air, wrapping around them like a fog, as the atmosphere thickened with an unsettling energy. The young woman gasped, her breath hitching in her throat as her eyes widened in disbelief. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, making it difficult to breathe. "Like your shoulders feel heavy," Ghetto continued, his voice low and steady. And every breath is painful, isn't it? Her hand moved instinctively to her chest, fingers clutching at the fabric of her shirt as if trying to hold herself together. She nodded slowly, shock and confusion etched across her features. Ghetto leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt charged with an unsettling intimacy. And those dreams, the ones that haunt you at night, the ones where you feel violated. As he spoke, a shimmering form began to materialize behind the young woman, eerie and ethereal. A curse, grotesquely beautiful with multiple eyes and four elongated arms, began to take shape. Its gnarled, misshapen hands reached for her neck and chest, twisting through the space like a dark shadow. Her face drained of color, and she stammered, How do you know that? Don't move, Ghetto commanded, his tone turning sharp and authoritative. He extended his hand toward the curse, the resolve in his eyes unmistakable. With a swift, practiced motion, he began to draw the curse toward him, concentrating its chaotic energy into a small, pulsating orb of darkness that hovered between them. The air crackled with tension as the curse wailed softly, its form warping and shrinking at his command. The young woman's heart raced as she stood frozen, caught in the unsettling mix of fear and intrigue. The young woman gasped, feeling a sudden lightness as the curse was pulled away from her. Her mother watched in amazement, her earlier doubts giving way to a mix of fear and relief. The brunette gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. Wow, I can't believe it. I feel so much better. She rolled her right shoulder, marveling at the newfound ease of movement. The weight that had pressed down on her for so long had suddenly vanished, leaving her feeling light and free, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. As they stepped outside, the warm afternoon sun enveloped them in a gentle embrace. A soft breeze rustled through the nearby trees, carrying the sweet scent of blooming flowers that danced in the air. The brunette inhaled deeply, savoring the crispness of the air that no longer burned her lungs. It felt refreshing, invigorating. Turning to Ghetto, Sato's eyes brimmed with tears of relief and gratitude. She bowed deeply, her voice trembling with emotion as she expressed, "We can't thank you enough for what you've done. You've given my daughter her life back." The brunette nodded in agreement, a genuine smile breaking across her face for the first time in months. "I never thought I'd feel normal again," she admitted, her voice soft yet filled with joy. "Thank you, truly." Saito, still bubbling with excitement, tugged at the brunette's sweater playfully. "See? He's like the Buddha himself." The brunette chuckled, her smile widening. "Yeah," she replied, still basking in the warmth of the moment. Ghetto stood at the entrance, his dark robes contrasting sharply against the vibrant greenery surrounding him. He wore a fixed smile, but his eyes held an unreadable glint, a hint of something deeper lurking beneath the surface. "Please, we need to help one another," he said smoothly, his voice carrying an undertone that suggested unspoken truths. "Come back anytime." As mother and daughter walked away, their steps felt lighter, their spirits noticeably lifted. Ghetto watched them go, a mixture of satisfaction and contemplation washing over him. In his pocket, the small, pulsating orb that contained the curse throbbed rhythmically, a constant reminder of the power he wielded and the secrets he guarded. With a deliberate motion, Ghetto reached into his pocket and retrieved the cursed ball, holding it up to his face. In an instant, his expression shifted from the pleasant facade he had maintained to one of utter disgust. His lips curled into a sneer as he spat. "That's rich, coming from a monkey who can't even use jujutsu." "There's the real you, Master Ghetto," a voice chirped, catching him off guard. He turned to see a young woman with striking pink hair standing nearby, her eyes sparkling with amusement. Ghetto quickly regained his composure, raising an eyebrow at her unexpected appearance. "Ah, Manami, I didn't hear you approach," he said, his tone slightly more formal than usual. Manami moved closer, her body language relaxed yet alert, as if she were always ready for action. "The commanders are here. They're waiting in the meeting room," she informed him, her voice professional, though a playful smile tugged at the corners of her lips. Ghetto nodded, reaching into the folds of his robes to produce a small spray bottle. Without a word, he began to spritz the contents over his body, lingering on his torso. Manami watched this peculiar ritual with a mix of curiosity and confusion. "What are you doing?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Her expression was a mix of intrigue and bemusement. As he methodically sprayed himself, Ghetto replied, his voice dripping with disdain. Disinfecting. Can't have that monkey stench spreading. Now can we? He wrinkled his nose at the mere memory of his previous interaction, as if it were a foul odor lingering in the air. Manami shook her head, a small sigh escaping her lips. Always the charmer, aren't you, Master Ghetto? She murmured, more to herself than to him, her tone carrying a hint of affectionate exasperation. With a flourish, Ghetto pocketed the cursed ball along with the spray bottle, straightening his robes with an air of theatricality. Shall we? He asked, gesturing toward the imposing building ahead of them. We shouldn't keep our esteemed commanders waiting. As they strolled down the dimly lit hallway, a blend of anticipation and nervousness filled the air, wrapping around them like a gentle mist. The walls, adorned with framed artwork in shades of gold and deep burgundy, seemed to close in, creating an intimate atmosphere as they made their way to the meeting room. Their footsteps echoed softly against the polished wooden floor, each sound intermingling with the distant murmurs of other conversations that floated through the air like whispers of excitement. Ghetto, his eyes closed and a contented smile playing on his lips, breathed in the moment. It's been such a long time since we've all gotten together. I'm so happy. His cheeks flushed with excitement, radiating joy that was infectious. As if caught in a burst of spontaneity, he added, "Let's take a group photo. Where's the SLR camera?" "Right here," Manami replied, pulling the camera from her bag with a flourish. The sleek device glimmered in the soft light, ready to capture their camaraderie. They gathered close for a cheerful selfie, laughter bubbling up like champagne. Just as they positioned themselves, a booming voice cut through the moment like a clap of thunder. "Get out here, Ghetto!" The shout echoed down the hall, causing them to turn sharply, surprise etched on their faces. Standing at the end of the hallway was a regal old man, his bald head gleaming under the harsh lights. He wore a striking yellow and black striped suit that exuded authority, complete with a matching tie that hung perfectly against his crisp white shirt. He looked every bit the important businessman he was, and his face was flushed red, not just from exertion, but perhaps from the fervor of a man used to being in charge. "Hey, Ghetto!" he boomed again, his voice ringing with urgency. But Ghetto's smile never wavered as he addressed the man with a calm demeanor that contrasted the old man's bluster. "Hello, Mr. Mory. What's the rush?" he asked, his tone smooth and unruffled, as if he were accustomed to handling such interruptions with grace. Mr. Mory was panting heavily, beads of sweat gathering on his forehead as he thrust a crumpled piece of paper toward Ghetto, his hand trembling slightly. "Why you?" he sputtered, gasping for breath, desperation lacing his words. "Hurry up and exorcise my curse. Just look at the amount I've paid you." Ghetto, unfazed and coolly detached, turned to Manami, his expression as icy as the air between them. "How much?" he inquired, his voice devoid of emotion. Manami quickly consulted her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen as numbers flickered to life. "About 150 million yen in total," she reported, her brow knitting together in concern. "However, there have been no donations in the last 6 months." A cold smile crept across Ghetto's lips, his narrowed eyes glinting with something akin to amusement. We're done then," he declared, each word dripping with finality, leaving no room for debate. Mr. Kanamori's face drained of color, perspiration gleaming on his forehead as he scanned the room, desperate for any hint of compassion. "What are you saying?" he stammered, a quiver in his voice betraying his growing panic. Ghetto turned his piercing gaze back to Mr. Mory, the coldness in his dark eyes piercing deeper than any blade. "You're nothing more than curse-collecting monkeys. Money-collecting monkeys," he stated flatly, savoring the gravity of his words. He paused dramatically, allowing the heavy silence to engulf the space. "Monkeys have their roles." In a swift and fluid motion that belied the tension in the air, Ghetto produced the cursed ball he had obtained earlier. He held it up to the light, scrutinizing it with a critical gaze. The curse pulsed and writhed within, casting sinister shadows that danced across his face, making him appear almost otherworldly. Then, without warning, Ghetto tipped his head back and swallowed the cursed ball whole. The grotesque sound of his gulp reverberated in the quiet hallway, punctuating the tension and leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. "No money, no use," he proclaimed flatly, his unwavering eyes locked onto Mr. Kanamori's face. The chilling weight of his words hung heavy in the atmosphere, like an impending death sentence hanging over the unfortunate man. "Why you?" Mr. Mori began, his face twisting in a mixture of rage and terror. But before he could finish, a sudden and excruciating pain erupted within him, coursing through his body like wildfire, cutting short his defiance. 3 curses materialized around him, their forms twisted and grotesque, as if they had been wrenched from the very fabric of the air itself, born of the malevolence that radiated from Ghetto's actions. One of the curses latched onto his mouth, its ethereal tendrils snaking around him, silencing his scream before it could fully form. Another attached itself to the right side of his head, near his eyelashes, its spectral form pulsing with malicious intent, a dark heartbeat echoing in the silence. The third clamped down on his right ear, its grip unbreakable and merciless, as if it were a predator savoring its prey. In a horrifying instant that stretched into an eternity, the curses tore into Mr. Kanamori's flesh. His head split open with a sickening crack that reverberated through the hallway, a sound that would haunt the air long after. Blood sprayed in an arc, splattering across the polished floor and onto Momoka's stylish heels, the crimson droplets stark against the sleek black leather, a vivid reminder of the violence that had just unfolded. Manami looked down at her stained shoes, her face a mixture of disgust and contemplation. The sight of the blood seemed to trigger a deeper reflection within her. "Are we the same race?" she mused, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a hint of genuine curiosity in her tone, as if she were pondering a philosophical question rather than witnessing a gruesome murder, grappling with the implications of humanity in the face of such brutality. Ghetto, already turning towards the exit, glanced back over his shoulder. His face was a mask of indifference, as if what had just transpired was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "See?" he said, his tone matter-of-fact, devoid of any remorse. "Non-sorcerers are just monkeys." As they walked away from the grisly scene, their footsteps echoed in the now silent hallway, a haunting reminder of the horror they left behind. The flickering overhead lights cast long shadows, stretching and twisting with each step they took, creating an atmosphere thick with tension. The air was heavy with the metallic scent of blood and the lingering aura of cursed energy, a pungent reminder of the darkness that surrounded them. Each step brought them closer to the frosted glass door that marked the entrance to the meeting room. Through the opaque surface, they could see the faint outlines of their colleagues already gathered inside, blissfully unaware of the horror that had just unfolded mere steps away. As they entered the meeting room, a hush fell over the gathered group. The air was thick with anticipation, and all eyes turned to Ghetto as he strode confidently to the head of the table. His dark robes swished softly with each step, and his eyes glinted with a mix of excitement and malice, a predator among his pack. Clearing his throat, Ghetto spread his arms wide, as if embracing the entire room. "My family," he began, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the space, drawing them in like moths to a flame. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, the tension palpable. "The age of monkeys is over," he continued, his tone growing more passionate with each word, a fervor igniting in the hearts of his followers. They leaned in, hanging on his every word, their loyalty palpable in the charged air. Ghetto's eyes narrowed, and a mischievous smile played across his lips, a predator reveling in the thrill of the hunt. "First on the agenda," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, forcing everyone to lean in even closer, eager for the revelation. "Will destroy the cornerstone of the Jujutsu world, Jujutsu High." Chapter 6. Hyaki Yaku, War on Christmas Eve. Morning at Jujutsu High. Winter's crisp air enveloped Jujutsu High as the morning sun struggled to warm the frost-covered grounds. Inside the bustling hallways, students chattered and laughed, their voices echoing against the stone walls. In a quieter corridor, Gojo leaned casually against the wall, his usual playful grin replaced by a rare seriousness as he spoke with Principal Mazumichi Yaga. Principal Yaga, an imposing figure with a muscular build and tan skin, stood by the window. His short, spiky dark brown hair contrasted sharply with his shaved head, while his thick eyebrows furrowed above piercing eyes. A neatly trimmed mustache and goatee framed his stern expression. "We still can't confirm Ghetto's involvement," Yaga said, his deep voice tinged with concern as he gazed out at the snow-dusted grounds. "Are you sure you're not jumping to conclusions, Gojo?" Gojo shook his head, his carefree demeanor replaced by a rare intensity. "I understand your skepticism, Principal, but I'm certain. I investigated the scene myself, and the evidence points directly to Ghetto's curse manipulation techniques." Yaga turned from the window, his eyes narrowing. "What exactly did you find?" "Residual curse energy with Ghetto's unique signature," Gojo explained, his voice low to avoid being overheard. "And multiple eyewitness accounts match his description. It's too much to dismiss as coincidence." Yaga sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "If you're right, this could have serious consequences for Jujutsu High and the entire sorcerer community." Suddenly, Yaga stiffened, his instincts flaring as he felt a shift in the air. He turned to Gojo, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Something feels off." Gojo's usual playful demeanor vanished in an instant. His expression grew serious as he closed his eyes, focusing intently. A quiet stillness surrounded him as he extended his senses outward, searching for the source of unease. When his eyes snapped open moments later, they burned with fierce determination. "I feel it too," he said, his voice low and uncharacteristically grave. "There's a powerful presence heading this way." Yaga wasted no time. His broad frame moved with purpose as he strode to the nearby intercom system. Without hesitation, he pressed the button, his deep, commanding voice echoing through every hallway of the school. "Attention all sorcerers, grade 1 and above," he announced, his tone sharp and resolute, leaving no room for doubt or delay. "Report to the front gate immediately. This is not a drill." A wave of murmurs rippled through the student body as confusion and tension spread. Yet Yaga remained steadfast, turning back to Gojo with a grim expression. "We need to act fast. Whatever's coming, we have to be ready for it." Gojo gave a curt nod, already stepping toward the exit with a sense of urgency. "I'll gather the others," he said firmly, his usual levity replaced by razor-sharp focus. "Meet you at the gate in 5. Without another word, he disappeared down the corridor, moving swiftly to prepare for the unknown threat looming on the horizon. Outside, Isuku, Panda, Maki, and Inumaki strolled across the school grounds, their breaths forming soft clouds in the crisp winter air. The landscape around them was blanketed in a pristine layer of snow, the stark white expanse broken only by the vibrant colors of their scarves. Izuku's scarf, a light oceanic teal, matched the determination often reflected in his eyes. Panda's scarf, true to his playful nature, was a bold black and white checkered pattern that seemed to mirror his personality. Maki's scarf, practical and understated, was a dark blue that complemented her composed demeanor, while Inumaki's scarf stood out with its whimsical rice ball designs, a nod to his favorite food. Their conversation meandered as they walked, shifting from the looming stress of upcoming exams to the latest rumors of a curse sighting in town. The group's laughter and chatter blended with the crunch of snow beneath their boots, creating a moment of warmth amidst the chilly surroundings. But just as Izuku was in the middle of a sentence, he suddenly froze, his teal eyes widening in alarm. The air around them felt different. He couldn't quite place it, but it was as if the atmosphere had thickened, heavy with an unspoken tension. It reminded him of the eerie calm before the storm when the world seemed to hold its breath. "Hey, do you guys feel that?" Izuku murmured, his voice barely more than a whisper, the unease in his tone enough to make the others stop and glance around warily. Maki adjusted her glasses, her sharp eyes scanning the area with precision. "Now that you mention it, something does feel off," she murmured, her tone edged with suspicion. Beside her, Panda tilted his head, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a rare seriousness. "My sensors are picking up an unusual energy signature," he said, his voice low and measured. "It's faint, but it's there." Inumaki remained silent, as was his nature, but his narrowed eyes betrayed his heightened focus. He surveyed their surroundings with careful intensity, every muscle in his body tensing as if preparing for the worst. The group instinctively drew closer together, their casual stroll abandoned as they shifted into a defensive formation. Izuku's hand hovered near his cursed ring, his fingers twitching slightly, ready to summon Rika at a moment's notice. "Should we head back inside?" Panda suggested, his voice unusually subdued, almost as though he didn't want to disturb the stillness of the air. But before anyone could answer, the crackle of the school's intercom system broke the silence. Principal Yaga's urgent voice echoed across the grounds, carrying an unmistakable weight of authority and concern. The students exchanged uneasy glances, a shared understanding passing between them. Whatever was happening, it wasn't good. "No, stand your ground," Izuku said firmly, his gaze locking onto the horizon. His eyes caught the shape of a cursed pelican descending toward them, its dark presence cutting through the winter sky. "Something is approaching," he added, his voice steady despite the tension rippling through the group. As the cursed pelican landed with an ominous thud, a figure leaped gracefully from its back. The man's long coat billowed dramatically in the cold breeze, his movements fluid and deliberate. His piercing gaze swept across the familiar surroundings, a complex mix of nostalgia and disdain flickering in his eyes. "This place sure hasn't changed," he remarked, his voice carrying a faint trace of amusement, as though he found the scene both amusing and tiresome. From the pelican's gaping mouth, two figures stepped out onto the ground, their presence commanding immediate attention. The first was a girl with long caramel hair neatly tied back in a bun, her posture exuding confidence. Her brown eyes sparkled with excitement, a sharp contrast to the tension in the air, as she took in the scene with an almost childlike curiosity. She wore a beige cardigan layered over a crisp white button-down shirt, paired with an indigo skirt that stopped mid-thigh. White leg warmers hugged her legs, complementing her brown loafers and adding a touch of charm to her otherwise composed appearance. Beside her stood her twin sister, identical in every way, their matching features and synchronized movements making them an unsettling yet captivating sight. A third figure lingered in the shadows of the pelican's maw, remaining hidden for now, their presence a silent promise of further complications to come. The air grew heavier, the tension thick enough to cut with a blade, as the group braced themselves for whatever was about to unfold. "Wow, Ghetto-sama? Are we really in Tokyo?" Nanako's voice rang out, echoing across the school grounds. Her nose crinkled in distaste as she sniffed the air and added with a dramatic flair, "This place reeks of countryside." Her twin sister, Mimiko, sighed softly at the outburst, her disapproval evident. Mimiko's short brown bob, neatly cut with a symmetrical fringe, framed her calm expression. She adjusted her grip on the peculiar doll she carried, a stitched-up figure with a tiny noose dangling ominously around its neck. Dressed in a navy blue sailor fuku, complemented by gray knee-high socks and polished brown loafers, Mimiko looked every bit the picture of quiet composure. "Nanako, that's rude," she admonished gently. Nanako turned to Mimiko with a spark of defiance in her amber eyes. "Wadash, but don't you think so too, Mimiko?" she pressed, clearly expecting her twin to agree. Before Mimiko could respond, a loud, booming voice shattered the moment. "Just get down already," it demanded. All heads turned as a large, muscular man emerged, of all places, from the mouth of a giant pelican. His bare chest was boldly on display, adorned with two prominent, heart-shaped markings where his areolas should have been. A blue headband kept his mid-length blonde hair in place, while loose pants hung low on his hips, leaving him seemingly unbothered by the chilly air. Nanako blinked at the sight, her face blank with disbelief. Then, with a deadpan tone, she asked, "Aren't your fruity-ass cold?" Her words hit their mark, and the man visibly bristled, his muscles tensing as he shot her a sharp, irritated glare. Who are those guys?" Mimiko asked, her voice softer but tinged with curiosity. She gestured toward Izuku and the others, her gaze scanning the group with interest. Their defensive stances piqued her attention, but before she could linger on them, Nanako's focus shifted entirely. Her amber eyes lit up with sudden excitement as they landed on a particular member of the group. Her expression transformed into one of pure delight, and a wide grin spread across her face. "A panda!" she squealed, her voice practically vibrating with enthusiasm. "So cute!" In an instant, Nanako whipped out her phone, her fingers moving with practiced speed as she opened the camera app. She bounced on her toes, her energy infectious, while her sparkling eyes seemed to gleam with tiny stars. Holding up her phone, She eagerly framed Panda in the shot, her excitement bubbling over. "Nanako, focus," Mimiko whispered urgently, nudging her sister in an attempt to rein her in. But Nanako was already snapping pictures, her finger tapping furiously on the screen. "But Mimiko, look at him. He's so fluffy and round," she gushed, zooming in on Panda's face. Her voice softened into a dreamy tone. "I've never seen a real panda up close before. Do you think he'd let me pet him?" Panda, caught completely off guard by the sudden attention, shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. His usual playful demeanor faltered, replaced by a mixture of confusion and unease. For a moment, he stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. Then, with a deep breath, he composed himself, his expression firming as he addressed the intruders with a steady voice. "Who the hell are you guys?" Panda demanded, his paws clenched tightly at his sides, his tone sharp and unyielding. He jerked his head toward Izuku in a pointed gesture. "Izuku-san here won't forgive any intruders, you know?" Beside him, Inumaki stood silent but firm, his posture emanating quiet resolve. He gave a small nod of agreement before cryptically muttering, "Kanbu," his narrowed eyes fixed intently on the unfamiliar faces before them. "Eh?" Izuku blurted out, his voice cracking as he was suddenly thrust into the center of attention. His wide, startled eyes darted between his friends and the strangers, utterly baffled by the situation. Maki stepped forward with deliberate confidence, her glasses catching the pale glint of the winter sun. Her expression was calm, yet her words cut like ice. "Just leave already," she said, her voice steady and cold, "before Izuku-san here kicks your sniveling asses." Izuku's jaw dropped, his disbelief plain as day. A vein throbbed visibly on his forehead, and a tick mark pulsed at his temple. "Why are you assholes throwing me under the bus?" he shouted, his face flushing crimson with a mix of embarrassment and frustration. Panda shrugged nonchalantly, his round shoulders lifting and falling in an almost exaggerated motion. "You're the one who noticed them first," he said matter-of-factly, as though the logic was inarguable. "Bonito flakes," Inumaki chimed in, nodding solemnly, his cryptic comment adding an air of mystery to the moment. Maki adjusted her glasses, a sly smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. "It's true, Izuku. You were the first to sense their presence," she said, her tone betraying a hint of amusement. Izuku's bravado crumbled instantly. His shoulders sagged, and his earlier fire drained from his expression like air from a punctured balloon. A shadow seemed to fall over his face, darkening his features as thin, tired lines appeared under his eyes. He stared blankly at the ground, processing his so-called friend's betrayal. Slowly, his head drooped, and as if to mock his mood, a small, cartoonish rain cloud materialized above him, dripping water onto his slumped figure. "Smartass," Izuku muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible as he stood there, shoulders hunched in defeat. Before he could wallow any further, a pair of hands suddenly grasped one of his own, their touch firm yet oddly gentle. Startled, Izuku looked up to find himself face to face with a man who exuded an air of effortless charisma. His long dark hair framed his striking features, and his eyes gleamed with a calm yet unsettling intensity. "I'm Suguru Ghetto," the man said smoothly, his voice rich and composed, his lips curved into a polite but enigmatic smile. "Nice to meet you, Yagikuin." How does he know that? Izuku's thoughts flared with frustration, his mind racing to piece things together. Outwardly, he forced a polite, albeit hesitant, response, his voice uneven. Nice to meet you." Panda and Maki exchanged wide-eyed glances, their astonishment mirrored in their expressions. Their thoughts practically screamed in unison, "So fast!" Even Inumaki, who rarely showed much emotion, let his usually impassive mask slip, his surprise evident. Ghetto's eyes sparkled with a peculiar intensity as he fixed his gaze on Izuku, studying him like a puzzle he was eager to solve. His voice was calm, yet laced with an undercurrent of passion. "You possess a truly remarkable power," he began, his words deliberate. "I believe that such great power should be used for great purposes. Tell me, have you never questioned the way this world works?" Izuku's brow furrowed deeply, his confusion plain as day. What is he even talking about? He thought, his mind scrambling to decipher Ghetto's cryptic words. But Ghetto pressed on, his tone growing more fervent, his conviction palpable. Most pro-heroes, save for a rare few, are driven by greed. Fame, fortune, and the strength of their quirks are all they care about. Meanwhile, those with so-called villainous quirks or those born without quirks at all are forced to kneel before the powerful. Is that justice? As Ghetto's impassioned words echoed in the air, fragments of Izuku's past began to surface, unbidden and raw. Memories flashed through his mind like jagged shards of glass. Useless DKU. Izumi, I want you to become my successor and inherit one for all. Hey nerd, if you're so desperate to get a quirk, there's a way. I don't think he can become a hero. Take a swan dive off the roof, and maybe you'll have a quirk in your next life. Each memory struck like a blow to his chest, the weight of them threatening to crush him. Yet, he stood there, silent, grappling with the storm raging within him. Izuku's teal eyes narrowed, a storm of pain and defiance flickering within their depths as he locked his gaze on Ghetto. The man seemed to sense the turmoil brewing in Izuku's expression, his voice smooth yet insistent as he pressed on with his argument. It's the same with Jujutsu sorcerers, but different, Ghetto began, his tone laced with conviction. We live in the shadows, hidden from the public eye, working tirelessly to protect the commoners who remain blissfully unaware of the dangers around them. Without warning, Ghetto's arms slid around Izuku's shoulders, pulling him closer with a casual familiarity that made Izuku's muscles tense. Despite the discomfort, he didn't pull away, his body rigid as his mind raced. Ghetto's lips curved into a faint smile as if he relished the tension. It's so irritating, don't you think? This world, this broken system. I want to purge it of its corruption, to rebuild it in my image. A world where the strong adapt to the weak, and the weak thrive under the strength of others. Sure, Izuku muttered, his tone distant, the word more a placeholder than a response. His mind churned, struggling to untangle the web of Ghetto's words and the implications hidden within them. Ghetto's voice grew more fervent, his passion igniting like a spark-catching flame. Mankind, Kami's so-called greatest creation, is standing in the way of its evolution. It's absurd. Humanity clings to outdated notions of survival, dragging itself into stagnation. That's why I need your help, Izuku. Curiosity, despite the unease clawing at him, got the better of Izuku. He tilted his head slightly, a single brow arching in question. And that is? He asked cautiously, his voice steady despite the growing knot in his stomach. Ghetto's next words hit like a thunderclap, reverberating through Izuku's very core. I want to kill every non-sorcerer and quirkless person. I will create a world where only those with quirks and jujutsu sorcerers exist. That is the future I envision. Time seemed to grind to a halt. Izuku's breath caught in his throat, his teal eyes widening as the weight of Ghetto's declaration crashed down on him. For a fleeting moment, his face went blank, a canvas wiped clean of expression as emotions warred beneath the surface. Shock, disbelief, and a creeping sense of dread battled for dominance. A chill coursed through him, colder than the biting winter air, leaving him momentarily paralyzed. Words failed him, his mind struggling to comprehend the enormity of what had just been said. That's enough, Suguru. Step away from my students. Gojo's voice sliced through the tension like a blade, calm yet commanding, carrying an authority that demanded attention. He stood tall at the entrance of the school grounds, his pristine white hair catching the faint light of the winter sun, ruffling gently in the icy breeze. Behind him, Principal Yaga loomed, flanked by a group of resolute Grade 1 sorcerers who formed an unwavering line of defense. Their faces were etched with determination, their stances ready for whatever was to come. Ghetto turned slowly, his movements deliberate, and his expression shifted into a wide, almost disarming grin. His dark eyes sparkled with a genuine excitement that seemed completely at odds with the gravity of the moment. Satoru, he greeted warmly, his voice carrying a familiar fondness that belied the tension in the air. It's been far too long. Despite the palpable hostility crackling like static around them, Ghetto's demeanor remained unervingly cheerful. He let his gaze wander over the gathered sorcerers, his lips curling into a knowing smirk as his eyes finally settled back on Gojo. I must admit, he began, his tone casual, almost conversational. I've been hearing quite the buzz about this year's first years. Exceptional, they say. He chuckled softly, the sound light but laced with something darker. His gaze flickered to Izuku and his companions, lingering for a moment before returning to Gojo. Your handiwork is written all over them. It's unmistakable. Ghetto's sharp eyes swept over the group of students, assessing them with a predator's precision. There was an unsettling gleam in his gaze, one that hinted at both curiosity and danger. Scoping out the new generation, he mused aloud, his voice carrying a faint note of amusement. He gestured lazily toward the students one by one, his words cutting like knives. A special-grade cursed human, a mutated cursed corpse, a descendant of spellcasters. His hand moved from Izuku to Panda to Inumaki, his tone almost clinical, as if he were cataloging specimens rather than acknowledging people. Then his gaze landed on Maki, and his grin twisted into something cruel, mocking. And, a failure of the Zenin clan, he added, his voice dripping with disdain. The words hung in the air like a venomous cloud. Maki's eyes widened, her shock quickly giving way to fury. Her hands balled into fists at her sides, and her voice trembled with rage as she spat. "You bastard!" But before she could finish, Ghetto's expression darkened, his earlier amusement vanishing like a fleeting shadow. His tone turned sharp and cold, cutting through her words. "Watch your tone, bitch," he snapped, his voice low and venomous. "I have no need for monkeys like you in my world." As he spoke, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The air grew heavy and oppressive, and the faintest hint of an ominous purple hue began to seep into the surroundings, as though the very environment recoiled in response to his malice. Izuku had been silently observing, his fists clenched at his sides, but Ghetto's words ignited a surge of anger deep within him. Without a moment's hesitation, he smacked Ghetto's arm away, breaking the man's firm grip on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, Ghetto-san," Izuku said, his voice low yet steady, carrying an edge of firmness rarely heard from him. His jet-black hair, streaked with green highlights, framed his face, casting shadows over his sharp, determined eyes. The seriousness in his expression was almost startling. Raising his head, he locked eyes with Ghetto, his teal gaze blazing with unshakable resolve. "I can't help someone who belittles my friends," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. For a fleeting moment, surprise flickered across Ghetto's face, like a crack in his polished demeanor. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a smooth, polite smile that didn't quite reach his calculating eyes. "My bad," he said lightly, his tone disarming but laced with subtle sharpness. "I assure you, it wasn't my intention to make you uncomfortable." Standing nearby, Gojo's expression remained unreadable behind his signature blindfold, but the slight tension in his shoulders betrayed his unease. His voice, however, was deceptively casual as he interjected, "Your business here, Suguru?" His words were light, almost playful, but there was an unmistakable edge beneath them. "Surely you didn't come all this way just to reminisce about old times." Ghetto's ever-present smile didn't waver, but a shadow passed through his eyes, momentarily darkening his otherwise composed facade. "Oh, Satoru," he replied, his voice carrying a hint of wistfulness that felt almost genuine. "Always so direct. Can't old friends simply enjoy a reunion?" Ghetto's smile gradually faded, replaced by a grim and resolute expression. He turned sharply to face Gojo, his eyes alight with an unwavering determination that sent a shiver through the air. "You're right, Satoru," he said, his voice low but firm, each word deliberate. "I do have an ulterior motive. I'm here to declare war." The weight of his declaration hung heavy in the silence, the tension thickening like a storm about to break. The school grounds seemed to hold their breath as Ghetto's voice rose, cutting through the stillness with commanding authority. "Everyone, gather around. Open your ears and listen closely." His tone was sharp, demanding attention from all who stood nearby. He paused for a moment, letting the gravity of his words settle into the hearts of his audience. "On the 24th of December, as the sun dips below the horizon, we will unleash the 100 Demons Night Parade." His proclamation echoed, reverberating across the grounds, leaving no room for doubt or hesitation. Ghetto's gaze swept over the crowd, his piercing eyes scanning each face, ensuring his words struck their mark. "The locations have been chosen with precision," he continued, his voice laced with a chilling certainty. The crucible of curses, Shinjuku, Tokyo, and the heart of Jujutsu itself, Kyoto. Ghetto's voice grew sharper, each word dripping with intensity. Oops, this image does not follow our content guidelines. To continue publishing, please remove it or upload a different image. Ghetto's voice grew sharper, each word dripping with intensity. 1,000 curses will be unleashed in every location. Their orders. His lips curled into a sinister grin, his eyes gleaming with unhinged fervor. To eliminate the trash. Maki's grip on her weapon tightened instinctively, her knuckles whitening as tension coiled through her body. Nearby, Panda's typically cheerful demeanor vanished, replaced by a grim, unflinching resolve. The air around them seemed to thicken, charged with the weight of impending chaos. "Unless you want hell itself to spill onto this earth," Ghetto proclaimed, spreading his arms wide as if to embrace the destruction he promised. "You'll work yourselves to death trying to stop me. Let us curse each other to our heart's content." His voice cracked with manic glee, and his laughter, wild and laced with madness, echoed across the school grounds like a haunting melody. The gravity of his threat settled over the group like a suffocating shroud, the reality of the danger sinking in with every passing second. Izuku clenched his fists tightly, his nails digging into his palms as a storm of anger and determination surged within him. He turned to his friends, his gaze meeting theirs. In their eyes, he saw the same fiery resolve reflected at him, a silent vow to stand together against the coming storm. "Ah, Ghetto-sama, the store is closing," Nanako shrieked, her voice sharp as she stared intently at her phone screen. Her sudden outcry shattered the air, slicing through Ghetto's maniacal laughter and jolting everyone around him. Mimiko, their flamboyant companion, and even Ghetto himself. Ghetto blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by the interruption. "It's already that late?" he murmured, glancing up at the horizon. The sun had dipped lower than he'd expected, casting the sky in a warm palette of fiery oranges and soft pinks. He turned back to Gojo, his lips curling into an apologetic smile. "Sorry, Satoru. You know how these girls are when it comes to crepes at Takashita Street. It seems I'll have to cut our little chat short." As he spoke, Nanako and Mimiko scurried off with their eccentric companion in tow, heading toward the cursed pelican waiting nearby. The massive bird shifted its weight restlessly, its beady eyes gleaming with impatience as it ruffled its feathers. Ghetto took a deliberate step toward the pelican, his long coat trailing behind him in the evening breeze. But just as he reached the creature, he paused, pivoting on his heel to face the group of sorcerers and students once more. His expression twisted into a mocking grin. "Oh my. For a place teeming with monkeys, what's so great about? You think I'll just let you leave?" Gojo's voice cut through the air like a blade, cold and commanding. Though his eyes were hidden behind his signature blindfold, his presence was sharp and unyielding, his gaze seemingly drilling straight into Ghetto. Ghetto's grin only widened, a glint of amusement sparking in his dark eyes. "Ah, Satoru," he drawled, his tone smooth as silk. With a casual flick of his wrist, curses began to materialize around the students. Izuku, Maki, Panda, and Inumaki. The air grew heavy with a sinister energy, suffocating and oppressive. The students tensed, their bodies coiled like springs, ready to defend themselves. Ghetto's voice was almost playful as he continued, "I hold all the cards here." His words dangled in the charged atmosphere, a dangerous taunt. Gojo's jaw tightened, his body rigid, but he didn't move. He couldn't risk the safety of his students. "Very well then," Ghetto said with a theatrical bow, his voice laced with mockery. "See you on the battlefield." In one fluid motion, he leaped onto the pelican's leg, his coat billowing dramatically. The massive bird spread its wings wide, stirring up a powerful gust of wind that whipped through the school grounds, scattering leaves and dust in its wake. As the pelican ascended into the sky, Ghetto's laughter echoed through the air, a haunting, chilling sound that lingered long after he disappeared into the horizon. The cursed spirits surrounding the students dissolved into nothingness, leaving the group shaken but unharmed. The tension in the air was palpable, a stark reminder of the looming threat Ghetto posed. December 24th, day of the Hyaki Yaku. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jujutsu High was enveloped in an eerie stillness that seemed almost unnatural. The once vivid sky was now streaked with fiery hues of orange and pink, the fading light casting elongated shadows that danced across the campus grounds. A palpable tension hung in the air, weighing heavily on students and faculty alike. They could feel it. Something ominous was coming. Whispers of unease passed between them as they steeled themselves for the unknown threat looming just beyond the horizon. In the deserted streets surrounding the school, a figure moved with deliberate intent. Ghetto's footsteps echoed against the cobblestones, the sound reverberating in the oppressive silence. His presence was a harbinger of tragedy, his path marked by the lifeless bodies of unsuspecting civilians. Each soul he claimed seemed to bolster his resolve, his dark eyes glinting with a complex blend of sorrow and ruthless determination. The weight of his actions was not lost on him, yet it only seemed to sharpen his focus. As he neared the imposing gates of Jujutsu High, Ghetto came to a halt, his figure silhouetted against the fading light. A contemplative expression crossed his face, his fingers absently tapping his chin as he spoke to the empty air. His voice was low and calculated, each word carefully measured. If I were to engage them in a full-scale battle, my odds of victory would be slim, perhaps 30% at best, he muttered, his tone tinged with analytical precision. And if the entire Jujutsu faculty were to join the fight, those odds would plummet to a mere 20%. A slow, sinister smile crept across his face, his eyes narrowing with a predatory gleam. But odds are just numbers, he murmured, his voice laced with quiet menace. Numbers can be changed. There's a way to shift the balance entirely in my favor. One decisive action could increase my chances to an overwhelming 99%. His gaze locked onto the school's towering structure, his expression hardening with grim resolve. His voice dropped to a whisper, each word dripping with dark anticipation. All I need to do is eliminate Izuku Yagi and claim the special class vengeful curse spirit, Rika or Emoto, for myself. The intensity in his eyes deepened, a flicker of madness mingling with his cold determination. As he stared at the entrance sign of Jujutsu High, a smirk tugged at the corners of his lips. His voice, low and mocking, carried a chilling amusement. They still cling to a plan they devised in their naive school days. Such foolishness. He chuckled softly, the sound devoid of warmth. Master and servant, bonds of friendship, hollow ideals. If I simply replace Yagi's head with my own, I can claim whatever cursed power he holds. He paused, his expression shifting to one of calculated thought. The college won't dare use Yagi in this war. They're too afraid of him, too afraid of the destruction he could unleash on both ally and enemy alike. They think they've accounted for every possibility, that their victory is all but assured. His smirk widened into a wicked grin, his eyes gleaming with malice. But they're blind to the truth. The real purpose of the Hyaki Yaku is to isolate and corner Izuku Yagi. They've walked right into my trap. It's time to raise the curtain on a new era. The air around him seemed to grow heavier, almost suffocating, as his malevolent intent spilled forth. The streetlights flickered ominously, their glow casting distorted shadows that danced and shifted like restless phantoms. A cold breeze swept through the street, rustling the trees and carrying with it a foreboding chill that seemed to seep into the very bones of the night. Ghetto inhaled deeply, savoring the moment. The scent of fear and anticipation lingered in the air, intoxicating and exhilarating. It was a prelude to the chaos he was about to unleash, a symphony of destruction that he would orchestrate. His lips curled into a final, menacing smile as he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the rising wind. Let the hunt begin. Izuku sat alone in the deserted classroom, his head tilted back against the chair as his tired eyes fixed on the ceiling above. The room was steeped in silence, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning and the muffled chatter of students echoing from distant hallways. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting the desks with golden streaks and casting elongated shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. His thoughts drifted, unbidden, to Ghetto's ominous words, "Let us curse each other as much as we want." The chilling phrase lingered in his mind, a relentless reminder of the peril that loomed just out of reach. It wasn't just the words themselves. It was the weight they carried, the foreboding sense of inevitability that made his chest tighten. Izuku exhaled a deep, weary sigh, the sound heavy with frustration and exhaustion. "What a drag," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely above a whisper. The words seemed to hang in the still air, a quiet testament to the growing burden he struggled to shoulder. He opened his eyes again, letting them trace the intricate patterns etched into the ceiling tiles. Each line and curve seemed to twist and turn like the tangled mess of his thoughts. As sunlight danced across the room, Izuku felt the gravity of everything that had happened pressing down on him. Yet he remained motionless, caught between reflection and the daunting reality ahead. The shoji door slid open with a soft swoosh, the sound barely louder than a whisper. A foot appeared in the narrow gap, halting its motion. With a firm shove, the door was pushed wide open, the sudden movement jolting Izuku out of his thoughts. He blinked and looked up, startled, just in time to see Maki stepping into the room. She wasn't in her usual uniform. Instead, she wore casual clothes, simple yet striking, a departure that made her seem almost unrecognizable. "Maki-san." Izuku's voice wavered, the surprise evident as he sat upright. Maki's sharp eyes swept across the empty classroom, taking in its quiet stillness before landing on Izuku. Her expression was calm, though her tone carried a faint edge of curiosity. "What are you doing here? There aren't any classes this week," she said, her voice a mix of inquiry and mild concern. Izuku shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his fingers trailing absent patterns across the surface of the desk. I couldn't calm down," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "There's no one at the dorm." Maki nodded, a small gesture of understanding, and without hesitation, she hopped onto the desk beside him. She crossed her legs, settling into a relaxed posture that seemed at odds with the tension hanging in the air. "Not surprising," she said, her tone casual but observant. "The second years are all off on that trip to Kyoto. Toge's with the third and fourth years, acting as backup in Shinjuku. And Panda," she let out a dry chuckle. "He's probably with the director, his favorite after all." "I see," Izuku murmured, his gaze dropping to the floor. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the faint chirping of birds outside the window. The weight of the quiet pressed down on them, and Maki, watching him from the corner of her eye, noticed how he kept opening his mouth as if to speak, only to close it again. His fingers drummed nervously on the desk, betraying his inner turmoil. Finally, Maki let out a sigh, cutting through the tension with bluntness. "Just ask." Izuku's head snapped up, his wide eyes meeting hers. "Eh?" The single syllable escaped him, confused and hesitant. "You're curious, right?" Maki pressed, her expression unreadable, though her tone carried a challenge. His mind raced, unearthing the memory of Ghetto's taunting words, the sneer in his voice still sharp in Izuku's ears, and a failure of the Zenin clan. Maki's voice interrupted his thoughts, her words deliberate and steady. "Why did he call me a failure?" It wasn't a question, it was a statement, clear and direct. Izuku flinched, his cheeks flushing as he stumbled over his words. "No, I mean, yes," he stammered, the admission tumbling out clumsily as he averted his gaze, embarrassed. Maki's gaze softened, her sharp demeanor momentarily easing. "My family, the Zenin clan, they were part of an elite lineage of Jujutsu sorcerers called the Three Clans." Her voice carried a weight of history and resentment. She paused, her piercing look locking onto Izuku. "Do you know what the minimum requirement is for someone to be a Jujutsu sorcerer?" Izuku's brow furrowed as he mulled over her question. "Does she mean seeing curses?" He wondered silently. After a brief hesitation, he asked aloud, "So, those glasses of yours, they help you see curses?" "Yes," Maki confirmed, her hand instinctively brushing the frame of her glasses. "Even ordinary people can see curses under extreme conditions, like when they're close to death. But," her voice trailed off as she slowly removed her glasses, squinting slightly as she held them up to the light. "Without these lame glasses, I can't see curses at all." Izuku watched her, his expression uncertain. He wasn't sure how to respond. Maki's face shifted, her features hardening as anger flickered in her eyes. "The food was terrible, my room was tiny, and old men who didn't know any better just lingered around." Her voice grew louder with each grievance, years of frustration spilling out like a dam breaking. "It was the absolute worst. That's why I had to leave my home." Her outburst reverberated through the empty classroom, leaving an almost deafening silence in its wake. Izuku blinked, his teal eyes wide with a mix of surprise and understanding. As he absorbed her words, fragments of their past interactions resurfaced in his memory, piecing together like a puzzle. Don't call me by my last name. Don't ask me about curse power. I don't have resistance to curses like you. Each of these moments now carried a deeper meaning. Izuku felt a newfound admiration for Maki, her resilience shining through despite the trials she had endured. Why are you still a Jujutsu sorcerer, Maki-san? Izuku asked softly, his voice tinged with genuine curiosity. A wry smile tugged at Maki's lips. Because I have a shitty personality? She stated bluntly, her tone almost defiant. I want to go back home as a first-class sorcerer and make everyone there cry their faces off when they see me. A glimmer of satisfaction lit her eyes as she added, and then I'll destroy the Zenin clan from the inside. Izuku couldn't help but chuckle at her bold declaration. The sound made Maki glance at him, her brow arching in suspicion. What? She asked, her voice carrying a hint of defensiveness. Izuku's face broke into a warm, genuine smile. It's just, that's so like you, Maki-san, he said, his voice filled with admiration. I want to become someone like you. Maki stared at Izuku, momentarily caught off guard by the raw sincerity in his words. His unwavering gaze seemed to pierce through her, stirring something deep within. As she looked at him, unbidden memories from her past clawed their way to the surface, each one sharper than the last. You shouldn't have been born. Disgrace of the Zenin clan. Everyone, don't become like Maki. The cruel echoes of her past clashed violently with the earnest admiration in Izuku's voice. She felt a strange, unfamiliar tug in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. Unaware of the storm brewing within her, Izuku pressed on, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. I want to live as strongly and upright as you, Maki. If there's anything I can do to help, just tell me. Let's destroy the Zenin clan. Together, his freckled cheeks flushed slightly as he smiled, the bashful sincerity in his expression so genuine it was almost disarming. Maki blinked, his words catching her completely off guard. For a moment, her usual stoic mask faltered, but she quickly gathered herself, her features hardening into their familiar sternness. Moron, she muttered, though her voice lacked its usual sharp edge. This isn't something anyone else can do for me. It only works if I do it alone. Izuku, sensing the subtle shift in her mood, decided to change the tone. A mischievous glint sparkled in his teal eyes as he teased. You know, Panda was right. Your ass really needs to get laid. The reaction was instantaneous. Maki's face turned a vivid shade of red, the blush spreading rapidly across her cheeks. Her composure shattered like glass. What? She sputtered, spinning on her heel so fast she nearly tripped over her own feet. Flustered beyond belief, she made a beeline for the shoji door. I'm going back to my room, she mumbled, her voice muffled and dripping with embarrassment. Okay, see you later, Izuku called after her, his tone light and amused, though he couldn't hide the grin tugging at his lips. Maki slid the shoji door shut behind her with a sharp snap, leaning back against it as she tried to steady her racing heart. The cool wood pressed against her back did little to soothe the heat radiating from her flushed face. She closed her eyes, exhaling shakily. Am I an idiot? She whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. Don't go feeling like you've been accepted. The world around her seemed to blur, the dim light of the room blending into a dreamy haze of indigo and soft pink. Faint, bubble-like patterns danced at the edges of her vision, as if mocking her fragile composure. She stood there for a moment, caught between the stoic facade she'd perfected and the unfamiliar warmth Izuku's words had left in her chest. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides, her blush refusing to fade. Damned idiot, she muttered under her breath, though it was unclear whether she meant Izuku or herself. Come forth from the abyss. Darkness beyond black. Exorcise these impurities. Ghetto's sinister voice reverberated through the air, each word dripping with malice. The sound seemed to ripple through the atmosphere, a chilling resonance that sent an icy shiver racing down Izuku's spine. Suddenly, a shimmering veil began to materialize around the school, its translucent surface undulating like the disturbed surface of a pond. The eerie energy it emitted was palpable. Izuku and Maki immediately snapped into action, their bodies taut with tension as the threat became undeniable. Izuku darted to the classroom window, his heart hammering against his ribcage. Peering outside, his breath caught in his throat. The veil was closing in rapidly, encasing the school grounds like a predator tightening its grip on helpless prey. But it wasn't just the ominous veil that seized his attention. Alongside it came a grotesque horde of curses. Their distorted, nightmarish forms writhed and slithered, advancing with terrifying intent. "What the hell is this?" Izuku muttered under his breath, his voice a mix of disbelief and steely resolve. His pulse quickened, the familiar cocktail of fear and adrenaline coursing through him, sharpening his senses. Maki was already moving, her naginata drawn in a blur of motion. The weapon thrummed faintly, as though resonating with her unwavering determination. "Izuku!" she barked, her tone sharp and commanding. "Take care of the curses. I'll locate the Veilcaster." Her eyes narrowed, scanning the surroundings with razor-sharp focus. Years of rigorous training had honed her instincts, and now every fiber of her being was on high alert. "Got it!" Izuku responded with a firm nod, his body coiling as he readied himself for action. The familiar weight of his katana at his side brought him a strange sense of comfort amidst the chaos. Without a moment's hesitation, he vaulted through the window, the wind howling past him as he descended. The world blurred around him as Izuku fell, his mind racing to calculate his next move. With practiced precision, he unsheathed his katana mid-air, plunging it into the side of a nearby building. Sparks erupted as the blade screeched against the wall, slowing his descent. The vibrations rattled up his arm, but his grip remained ironclad. He landed with a fluid roll, rising to his feet in one seamless motion. Almost instantly, he found himself surrounded. The curses closed in, their grotesque forms looming over him like a living nightmare. Some were horrifying amalgamations of human and beast, their features twisted and grotesque. Others defied logic entirely, their shapes an affront to nature itself. The air grew heavy with their malevolent energy, suffocating and oppressive. But instead of succumbing to fear, a spark ignited in Izuku's emerald eyes. This was what he had trained for, what he had endured countless trials to face. He tightened his grip on the katana, the grooves of the handle grounding him. The weapon felt like an extension of himself, a part of his very soul. A feral grin spread across Izuku's face as he surveyed the monstrous horde. Adrenaline surged through his veins, his body thrumming with anticipation. Every muscle in his frame was taut, ready to strike with the precision of a coiled spring. "This is going to be fun," he murmured, his voice low and charged with a mix of confidence and eagerness. The words weren't just a taunt to the curses. They were a reminder to himself. No matter how dire the situation, he had to stay sharp, to transform his fear into unshakable resolve. The first curse lunged at him, its misshapen claws slicing through the air with lethal intent. Izuku's grin only widened. With a swift motion, his katana gleamed in the fading light, carving a silver arc that promised swift retribution. The battle had begun, and Izuku was ready to prove to these abominations exactly what he was made of. With Ghetto, the air buzzed with an almost electric tension as Maki squared off against Ghetto, her naginata gripped tightly in her hands. Her stance was low and defensive, her sharp eyes flickering over her opponent, searching for any crack in his composure. The familiar weight of her weapon steadied her nerves, but she knew better than to let confidence cloud her judgment. Ghetto stood across from her, utterly at ease, his posture loose and unbothered, a stark contrast to Maki's coiled readiness. His lips curved into a smug smirk, his gaze cold and assessing. "So you've come," he said, his voice dripping with disdain, each word cutting through the charged air like a blade. The unspoken menace in his tone made the hairs on the back of Maki's neck stand on end. Her grip on the naginata tightened, her knuckles turning white as she steadied herself. "Is that a problem?" she shot back, her voice calm and even, though adrenaline coursed through her veins like wildfire. She took a measured step forward, her stance unshaken, her resolve unyielding. Ghetto chuckled darkly, his smirk widening into something more sinister. "It's not just a problem. You shouldn't be here," he said, his words laced with a quiet malice that sent a chill rippling through her. With a casual flick of his wrist, he summoned a grotesque, human-sized centipede curse. The creature materialized beside him in a ripple of cursed energy, its countless legs clicking against the ground with a sickening rhythm. The sound was grating, like nails dragging across a chalkboard, and it made Maki's teeth clench instinctively. "Sorry?" Ghetto sneered, his eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. "I don't waste my time on monkeys." The insult struck deep, igniting a spark of fury in Maki's chest. Without hesitation, she surged forward, her naginata slicing through the air with deadly precision. The blade sang with a high-pitched whistle as it arced toward Ghetto's midsection. But he was ready. Moving with an almost supernatural grace, he sidestepped her attack, his movements fluid and effortless. It was as though he could read her intentions before she acted, always staying just beyond her reach. Each narrowly missed strike only stoked Maki's frustration, her attacks growing faster, more aggressive, and less controlled. Sweat began to bead on her brow as she pressed her relentless assault. She feinted to the left, then swung her naginata in a wide, sweeping arc from the right. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though she might finally land a blow. But in her eagerness, she overextended. Ghetto's sharp eyes caught the opening instantly, and a predatory gleam lit up his face. In a blur of motion, he closed the distance between them. His fist shot forward like a hammer, slamming into Maki's solar plexus with brutal force. The impact drove the air from her lungs in a painful rush, and she stumbled backward, gasping for breath. Her vision blurred as she fought to stay upright, her body screaming in protest. But Ghetto showed no intention of granting her even a moment's reprieve. A shimmering black portal materialized beside him, the air around it warping and twisting like a heat mirage. With deliberate calm, Ghetto reached into its inky depths, his arm disappearing up to the elbow. When he withdrew his hand, Maki's breath hitched. Clutched in his grasp was a three-section staff, its joints linked by polished rings that gleamed ominously in the dim light. Intricate, flame-like patterns adorned each section near the metal connections, and the weapon seemed to hum with an almost sentient energy. A knot of dread coiled in Maki's stomach as she recognized it. "Playful Cloud," Ghetto announced, his voice brimming with quiet pride as he brandished the weapon. "This should be more than enough to deal with a failure like you." Summoning every ounce of her resolve, Maki launched herself at him once more. Her movements were sharp and precise, her determination unshaken despite the odds. But this time, Ghetto was fully prepared. He channeled an immense wave of cursed energy into the staff, causing it to vibrate with an intensity that made the air around it feel heavy and oppressive. As Maki closed the distance, Ghetto struck with ruthless efficiency. He unleashed a powerful upward swing, the staff glowing with raw, crackling energy. The force of the blow collided with her naginata, followed immediately by a swift horizontal strike that cut through the air with a sharp, resonant hum. The impact was devastating. A thunderous crack split the air as the upper blade of Maki's naginata shattered, sending shards of gleaming metal spiraling through the air like lethal fragments of a broken star. The once formidable weapon she had wielded with precision and trust was reduced to a hollow remnant, a splintered shaft trembling in her grip. "Wah!" Maki choked out, her voice faltering as her breath caught in her throat. Her wide, disbelieving eyes locked onto the ruined weapon, her mind grappling with the unthinkable. For a fleeting moment, she stood paralyzed, her thoughts a chaotic whirlwind, unable to reconcile the loss of her steadfast companion in battle. Ghetto, ever the opportunist, seized the opening like a predator sensing weakness. With a deliberate flick of his wrist, he conjured a curse from the depths of shadow, its grotesque form twisting and writhing as though it defied the natural order. The creature's most menacing feature was its tail, a long, sinuous appendage that gleamed like a blade honed to perfection, catching the fading light with a deadly shimmer. Before Maki could fully process the threat, let alone react, the curse struck. Its tail lashed out with blinding speed, a streak of motion too quick for the naked eye to follow. Pain exploded across Maki's body as the razor-sharp tail carved a brutal, jagged gash from her right shoulder, slicing downward across her chest. The precision of the strike was chilling. Fabric and flesh parted effortlessly, leaving a wound that oozed crimson in a gruesome spray. Blood splattered the ground in vivid streaks, staining the remnants of her tattered uniform and pooling beneath her feet. Maki staggered back, her breath hitching as her free hand shot up to press against the searing wound. Her fingers trembled, slick with warm blood that spilled relentlessly through her grasp. A violent cough racked her body, forcing up the metallic tang of blood that coated her tongue and threatened to choke her. Her vision faltered, the world around her dissolving into a disorienting blur of pain and shadow, the edges of her consciousness fraying. But Ghetto wasn't done. He loomed closer, his expression alight with a cruel, predatory satisfaction. His eyes gleamed with a dark hunger, as though he relished every second of her suffering. Without hesitation, he moved with a speed that seemed to mock the constraints of physics, his form a blur of motion. Pivoting sharply on his heel, he unleashed a devastating back kick, his leg propelled by a lethal combination of raw strength and cursed energy. The strike connected with Maki's midsection with bone-crushing force, the impact reverberating through her body like a thunderclap. The impact hit her like a runaway freight train. Maki felt the air explode from her lungs in a single, desperate gasp. Her feet left the ground as if gravity itself had betrayed her, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, she was suspended in midair. Her body twisted and flailed like a ragdoll caught in a storm, utterly powerless against the force that had sent her flying. The world around her became a chaotic swirl of colors and shapes, spinning wildly in a disorienting blur. Her airborne torment ended as abruptly as it began, with a brutal collision that sent shockwaves of pain through her entire body. She slammed into the ground with bone-jarring force, her body bouncing and rolling uncontrollably across the unforgiving terrain. Each impact was a fresh symphony of agony, a relentless assault on her battered form. Sharp rocks and jagged debris tore at her skin, leaving trails of stinging cuts and deep bruises in their wake, painting her body with a tapestry of pain. When she finally came to a stop, her momentum spent, Maki lay crumpled on the cold, unyielding ground. Her chest heaved as she struggled for air, each breath a monumental effort that sent fresh spikes of pain radiating through her ribs. Every fiber of her being screamed in protest, her body a cacophony of suffering. Slowly, through sheer force of will, she managed to lift her head, though her vision swam and blurred, making the world around her seem distant and unreal. Through the haze, she saw him. Ghetto stood tall, his presence commanding and menacing. His eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction, the playful cloud staff spinning lazily in his hand as if mocking her with its effortless grace. He sneered down at her, his voice dripping with derision. "Is this all the great Zenin clan can muster?" he taunted, his tone laced with scorn and mock disappointment. As he turned and walked away, his disdain palpable, Maki's body gave out. She collapsed, her strength drained, her vision fading to black. Blood pooled beneath her, staining the earth as she lay unconscious, her battered form a testament to the brutality of the battle. Ghetto strode away, his sharp senses pricking at the faint disturbance rippling through the veil he had meticulously cast. His dark eyes narrowed, scanning the surroundings with predatory precision as a frown etched itself onto his face. "Someone tampered with the veil," he muttered, his voice carrying a blend of irritation and curiosity. "It'll take them about 5 minutes to reach me from the breach. Should I let it slide or deal with it myself?" He paused, weighing the options in his mind. Decisions. But before he could deliberate further, a sudden jolt of instinct shot through him like a lightning strike. A presence, swift, silent, and calculated, was closing in from behind. In a split second, the wall to his blind side exploded in a shower of debris, and Panda emerged, his massive frame a blur of motion. The cursed corpse swung his enormous fists in a crushing downward arc, aiming to obliterate his target in one decisive strike. Ghetto, however, was no ordinary opponent. With reflexes bordering on the supernatural, he twisted his body with serpentine grace, the powerful punches slicing through empty air, missing him by mere inches. "It's using the walls to shorten the distance," Ghetto noted inwardly, a flicker of admiration gleaming in his thoughts. "Clever." Panda's focus shifted momentarily as his eyes fell on Maki, crumpled amidst the rubble, her form bloodied and battered. His voice wavered with shock. "Mac?" The cry barely left his lips before Ghetto sprang into action. In one seamless, fluid motion, he pivoted on his heel, his leg slicing through the air with a devastating roundhouse kick. The blow connected with brutal precision, sending Panda staggering backward. The cursed corpse barely had a moment to stabilize before Ghetto followed up with a crushing downward hammer fist. The sheer force of the strike reverberated through Panda's body, his mechanical joints groaning under the punishing impact. Ghetto's expression remained cold, calculating, as he stood poised, ready for whatever came next. Panda's electronic brain whirred, struggling to keep up with the sheer speed and precision of Ghetto's relentless attacks. This guy's also good at martial arts, he thought, his circuits firing in overdrive. Despite the mounting damage to his body, Panda mustered the strength to shout, "You were careless. Toj now." Ghetto's sharp eyes darted around, a flicker of confusion breaking through his usually composed demeanor. He had sensed Panda's presence clearly, but now there was something else. A new presence that had somehow bypassed his defenses entirely. That fleeting moment of uncertainty was all Inumaki needed. The cursed speech user had expertly leaped through the very hole Panda had created, landing silently behind Ghetto, who remained oblivious to the ambush. With a swift and deliberate motion, Inumaki tugged down his collar, his eyes blazing with fierce determination. "Fall down!" The command tore through the air, saturated with cursed energy. The effect was immediate and devastating. An invisible force, immense and unyielding, crashed down onto Ghetto like a hammer from the heavens. The ground beneath him buckled and shattered, collapsing into a massive crater as though the earth itself sought to consume him. The sheer impact sent shockwaves rippling outward, stirring up a suffocating cloud of dust and debris that obscured the battlefield. But such power came at a steep price. Inumaki staggered, his body trembling as blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. He dropped to his knees, racked with violent, hacking coughs. Crimson droplets splattered the ground as he clutched at his throat, the agony evident in every strained breath. "Toj, are you okay?" Panda's voice rang out, heavy with concern as he rushed to his fallen comrade's side. Inumaki tried to respond, but his voice was faint, rasping out a single, broken word, "Igura." His usual strength was gone, replaced by a hoarse whisper that barely escaped his lips. Panda nodded grimly, his expression hardening. "Yeah, Maki comes first," he affirmed, his focus shifting to their injured friend lying nearby. Determination flickered in his eyes, but the brief moment of calm was shattered all too soon. The ground beneath them trembled violently, cracks splintering outward as a deep, guttural rumble filled the air. From the heart of the crater, something horrifying began to emerge. A monstrous curse clawed its way upward, its grotesque form an abomination of writhing faces and unblinking eyes. Each face contorted in agony, and every eye seemed to move and blink independently, creating a sickening, chaotic rhythm. The atmosphere grew suffocating, thick with a malevolent energy that sent shivers down their spines. This was no ordinary curse. It was a living nightmare, a chilling manifestation of Ghetto's terrifying power. And there he was, standing atop the monstrous curse as if it were his throne. Ghetto appeared, his presence commanding and sinister. His clothes were tattered and coated in dust, but his stance was unyielding, exuding an air of dominance. A predatory grin stretched across his face, sharp and menacing, while his eyes gleamed with a dangerous blend of excitement and malice. He looked every bit the orchestrator of destruction, reveling in the chaos he had unleashed. "Now," Ghetto drawled, his voice cutting through the rumbling earth and the strained breaths of his battered opponents, carried with it a chilling confidence, each word dripping with mockery. "Where were we, boys?" The question lingered, heavy and ominous, like the calm before a storm. Panda and Inumaki exchanged a fleeting glance, their muscles tensing as they prepared for the inevitable clash. The fight was far from over, and the promise of violence in Ghetto's tone was all the warning they needed. After Izuku dashed through the school, battling curses that relentlessly crossed his path, a sudden tremor shook the ground beneath him. His steps faltered as his heart pounded against his ribs. "What the hell? That's the third earthquake today," he thought, panic creeping into his mind. As he turned a sharp corner, he skidded to a stop, his breath catching in his throat. His wide eyes took in the devastation ahead. The courtyard had become a war zone. Shattered debris was scattered everywhere, and the once pristine grounds were smeared with streaks of blood. The air was thick with the metallic scent of violence. Maki, Panda, and Inumaki lay motionless on the ground, their battered bodies a testament to the brutal battle they had endured. Their uniforms were torn, their forms broken, and crimson stained their skin. In the heart of the destruction stood a man whose presence exuded a chilling malevolence. Izuku's gaze locked onto Maki's still figure, her uniform soaked in blood, her face pale and lifeless. A lump formed in his throat, his voice trembling as he whispered, "Maki-san." The words barely escaped his lips, weak and fragile like the hope clinging to his heart. The man responsible for this carnage, Ghetto, threw his head back and erupted into maniacal laughter that echoed through the courtyard like a sinister symphony. "I'm currently deeply moved," he declared, his voice laced with a twisted blend of joy and madness. His eyes gleamed with an unsettling fervor as he gestured toward the fallen Jujutsu sorcerers sprawled around him. "You came rushing to save Yagi, didn't you?" Ghetto sneered, his tone mocking yet filled with a strange admiration. Jujutsu sorcerers, willing to sacrifice themselves for others. What respect, what honor. His voice rose, trembling with unhinged emotion. "The world I've longed for. It's here, right in front of me." Tears streamed down his face, mingling with his laughter, creating a grotesque display of raw, chaotic passion. He shifted his focus to Izuku, his voice dipping into a grave, almost sorrowful tone. "The truth is, Yagi, I wanted you to witness this moment too. But everything I've done, it's all for the future of the Jujutsu world and the survival of quirks." Izuku's thoughts spiraled into chaos, struggling to grasp the weight of the scene unfolding before him. His eyes landed on Panda's lifeless, crumpled form lying motionless on the ground. A sharp pang of grief pierced through him. "Panda-kun," he whispered, his voice trembling with anguish, thick and heavy like a storm cloud about to burst. A faint, strained voice broke through the haze of his despair. "Izuku." It was barely more than a rasp, but it was enough to yank Izuku's attention. His head snapped toward the source. "Inumaki-kun," he shouted, his heart lurching in his chest as he spotted Inumaki. The boy's body was battered and broken, his breath shallow, his lips trembling as he fought to speak. With what seemed like the last shred of his strength, Inumaki forced out a single, desperate word. "Run." The word hit Izuku like a thunderclap. A storm of emotions churned within him. Fear, anger, and an unbearable sense of helplessness. His fists clenched tightly at his sides, his nails digging into his palms as he fought against the tide of despair threatening to drown him. "No. Why am I always so powerless to protect the people I care about?" The thought burned in his mind, a relentless echo of frustration and self-loathing. A faint pink hue of cursed energy shimmered around him, pulsating stronger with every passing second. Izuku's chest tightened as his thoughts spiraled back to a haunting memory, a scene drenched in sorrow and regret. "I can't let this happen again," he thought, his mind replaying the echoes of another tragedy. "I can't. I won't." Unbidden, the image of Rika's lifeless body forced itself into his mind, overlaying the fallen forms of Maki, Panda, and Inumaki. The vision, even if only a cruel illusion of memory, was unbearable. His heart ached, his resolve hardening against the weight of his pain. "This will never happen again." Izuku's mental scream erupted like a thunderclap within him, reverberating through his very soul. His cursed energy surged uncontrollably, spiraling outward with raw intensity. Pink lightning arced and crackled around his body, illuminating the space in chaotic flashes. The air itself seemed to ripple and distort, bending under the sheer force of his power. Time slowed, stretching into an agonizing crawl as Izuku felt a familiar presence stir deep within him. It was a presence he knew well, one that had always been there, waiting. He clenched his fists, his determination crystallizing into unshakable resolve. He knew what he had to do. With a voice that carried both wrath and unyielding resolve, he roared into the charged air, "Come, Rika!" The atmosphere around him twisted violently, shimmering with an otherworldly glow as the ground beneath his feet trembled. A monstrous figure began to materialize behind him, its sheer aura suffocating, its power undeniable. The air grew heavy, saturated with malice and vengeance. Standing tall and imposing was none other than the special class vengeful cursed spirit, Rika Orimoto, second complete manifestation. Across from him, Ghetto's eyes widened, the faintest flicker of surprise breaking through his otherwise manic expression. Yet, his lips curled into a cold, calculating smile, his confidence undeterred. He squared his shoulders, his voice dripping with chilling certainty as he declared, "I shall kill you." Izuku's teal eyes burned with unrelenting fury, their usual softness obliterated by the storm within him. The cursed energy surrounding him flared violently, whipping his hair and clothes in a tempest of raw power. His voice, once gentle and compassionate, now erupted as a guttural roar that shook the very ground beneath them. "I'll fucking kill you." Chapter 7. Cursed Human versus Cursed Manipulator. Present time. A barrage of curses sent Izuku hurtling through the air, his jet-black hair whipping wildly in the wind. He gripped his katana tightly, its polished blade gleaming in the sunlight. With a determined cry, Izuku began slashing through the curses, his movements fluid and precise. The blade cut through the ethereal forms like a hot knife through butter, leaving trails of dissipating energy in its wake. Rika, his cursed spirit companion, moved in perfect sync with him, her ghostly form tearing through the curses with equal ferocity. From the ground, Ghetto watched the spectacle with keen interest, a smirk playing on his lips. His eyes tracked every movement, analyzing and calculating. "Quality over quantity," he mused aloud, his voice carrying a hint of admiration mixed with malice. "What will you do now, Queen of Curses?" Izuku landed gracefully on one of the school's balconies, his breathing slightly labored. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his muscles ached from the exertion. Rika materialized beside him, a dark, viscous substance dripping from one of her arms. As it splattered on the ground, Izuku's eyes widened in horror at the sight before him. "Maki-san, Panda, Inumaki," he gasped, his voice cracking with emotion. His friends lay before him, their bodies battered and broken. Maki's usually fierce expression was replaced by one of pain, her glasses cracked and askew. Panda's fur was matted with blood, and one of his arms hung at an unnatural angle. Inumaki was unconscious, his bandages torn and revealing angry red welts beneath. Izuku's heart clenched painfully in his chest, a mix of guilt and determination washing over him. The three of them have horrible injuries, especially Maki-san, he thought, his fists clenching at his sides. The sight of his friends in such a state ignited a fire within him. With a surge of determination, he declared, "I won't let you die." Summoning his cursed energy, Izuku created a white, translucent barrier around his injured friends. The air within shimmered with healing energy, a soft, pulsing light that seemed to breathe life back into their battered forms. Slowly, wounds began to knit together, and the pained expressions on their faces eased. But before Izuku could breathe a sigh of relief, a blur of movement caught his eye. A figure, moving faster than his eyes could track, snatched Maki from within the barrier. The protective energy crackled and sparked at the intrusion, but couldn't prevent the sudden theft. "No fair! No fair!" Rika's otherworldly voice screeched, her form contorting with rage. She lunged forward, her spectral arms elongating unnaturally as she wrapped them around Maki's torso. With a forceful yank, she pulled Maki back towards the barrier. "Only you! Only you!" she howled, her grip tightening possessively around Maki's limp form. Izuku stood frozen, his eyes shadowed by his hair as he processed the scene before him. The air around him seemed to grow heavy, charged with tension. When he spoke, his voice was eerily calm, a stark contrast to the chaos around them. "Rika, what are you doing?" He lifted his head, revealing eyes wide with a mix of shock and something darker, more intense. "I owe that person a lot." His gaze locked onto Rika, and for a moment the world seemed to stand still. The background faded away, leaving only Izuku and Rika in sharp focus. When Izuku spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a weight that made even Rika pause. "You have to treat her very carefully." Rika's form shimmered, her rage dissipating as quickly as it had come. She rushed towards Izuku, her ethereal form radiating guilt and desperation. With gentle, trembling hands, she placed Maki's limp body in Izuku's arms. Izuku cradled Maki in a princess carry, her weight feeling both fragile and significant against his chest. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry," Rika wailed, her otherworldly voice cracking with emotion. Translucent tears streamed down her ghostly face, each droplet dissipating into mist as it fell. She hovered anxiously around Izuku, her form flickering with each sob. "Don't get mad," she pleaded, shrinking back as if expecting a harsh rebuke. Izuku's eyes softened as he looked at Rika. Despite the chaos around them, his voice remained calm and steady, an anchor in the storm. "I'm not mad," he assured her, his grip on Maki tightening protectively. His eyes held understanding, recognizing the complex emotions that drove Rika's actions. "Don't hate me," Rika whimpered, her form shrinking slightly as if bracing for rejection. Her spectral body trembled, the edges of her form blurring with uncertainty. "I don't hate you," Izuku replied, his voice filled with a warmth that seemed to soothe Rika's frantic energy. A small, reassuring smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "We're partners, remember? We face everything together." Izuku looked down at Maki's unconscious form, his eyes tracing the cuts and bruises that marred her usually fierce face. He pulled her closer, feeling her shallow breath against his chest. Each rise and fall was a reminder of her fragility and strength. "I'll protect you," he whispered, his voice barely audible but filled with fierce determination. His gaze shifted to Panda and Inumaki, their battered forms still lying motionless on the ground. "I'll protect you all." With utmost care, Izuku gently laid Maki back down next to her teammates. His movements were slow and deliberate, as if handling the most precious of treasures. He raised his hand, fingers splayed wide, and summoned a white translucent barrier that enveloped his injured friends. The air within the barrier shimmered with healing energy, a soft, pulsing glow that slowly worked to mend their wounds. Izuku stood up, his eyes now fixed on the distant figure of Ghetto. The wind picked up, ruffling his hair and clothes as he stepped onto the railing of the balcony. His body was tense with resolve, every muscle coiled and ready for action. Rika followed, hovering close to him, her form now calm but alert, mirroring Izuku's determination. "My enemy is that guy," Izuku said, his voice low and filled with a cold anger as he gestured towards Ghetto. The words carried a weight of finality, a declaration of intent. Rika's gaze followed Izuku's outstretched hand, her spectral eyes narrowing as they focused on Ghetto's standing form. "Izuku hates that guy?" Rika asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and growing animosity. Her form rippled, reflecting the intensity of Izuku's emotions. Izuku nodded, his teal eyes flashing with determination. "Yes, I hate him," he confirmed, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to resonate with Rika. The admission seemed to solidify something between them, a shared purpose crystallizing at that moment. "Then, Rika hates him too," she declared, her form growing larger and more menacing as she aligned herself with Izuku's emotions. Her spectral body pulsed with energy, tendrils of cursed power swirling around her. In a flash of movement that seemed to bend the very air around them, Izuku and Rika vanished from the balcony. They reappeared atop a nearby power pole, looking down at Ghetto from their elevated position. The wind whipped around them, ruffling Izuku's black hair and causing Rika's spectral form to flicker like a flame in a storm. Ghetto raised his gaze toward them, a sly smirk tugging at the corners of his lips as he felt the potent energy emanating from the duo. The air around him seemed to thrum with their power, an almost tangible force that ignited curiosity and intrigue within him. His long, dark hair swayed gently in the breeze, a stark contrast to the tension crackling in the air. "Welcome back," Ghetto called out, his voice carrying a hint of amusement as he gazed up at Izuku and Rika. His dark eyes glinted with curiosity, a sly smirk playing on his lips. "Why aren't you attacking?" The question hung in the air, a challenge and an invitation rolled into one. As Izuku remained silent, Ghetto's mind raced. His eyes narrowed slightly, analyzing every detail of the scene before him. A very complicated jujutsu circuit is necessary for healing curse power. Isn't it better to concentrate as much as possible? He mused internally. His smirk widened, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "Let's continue, shall we?" With a flick of his wrist, Ghetto summoned a horde of curses. They emerged from the shadows, their centipede-like bodies writhing and twisting in the air. Each curse was easily as long as a city bus, their segmented bodies gleaming with an otherworldly sheen. They surged forward, mandibles clicking ominously as they closed in on Izuku and Rika, their collective presence darkening the sky. Izuku's eyes narrowed, his stance shifting subtly, his body tensed, ready for action. "Rika," he said, his voice calm despite the impending danger. "Let's do that." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of understanding between the two. In perfect synchronization, both Izuku and Rika extended their hands. Rika's spectral form shimmered, pulsing with energy. Suddenly, a megaphone materialized in the air, its surface etched with intricate cursed patterns. Izuku snatched it deftly, the weight of it familiar in his grip. The metal was cool against his palm, but he could feel the power thrumming within it. Ghetto's eyes widened in recognition, his confident demeanor faltering for a moment. "The serpent eyes and fangs," he thought, a scowl marring his features. "The spell of the Inumaki clan." His mind raced, recalculating his strategy in light of this unexpected development. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he realized the potential threat this posed. Time seemed to slow as Izuku raised the megaphone to his lips. The air around him crackled with energy, the very atmosphere bending to his will. Static electricity danced across his skin, and the hair on the back of his neck stood on end. His eyes, filled with steely determination, locked onto the advancing curses. In that moment of suspended animation, Izuku uttered a single, powerful word: "Die!" The word reverberated through the air, a powerful force that defied all description. It felt as though reality itself bent to Izuku's command. A shockwave of pure energy erupted from the megaphone, expanding outward in a devastating arc. The air rippled and distorted, the very fabric of space warping beneath the influence of the cursed speech. Caught in its path, the curses had no time to react. They simply ceased to exist. In an instant, their forms disintegrated into nothingness, washed away by the unstoppable wave of power. One moment, they were a writhing mass of otherworldly horror, and the next, they were gone, leaving only scattered motes of light in their wake. As Izuku's command echoed across the battlefield, an unsettling stillness enveloped the area as if time itself had paused. The air hung thick with remnants of chaos, shimmering like 1,000 tiny stars caught in a gentle breeze. Flickering motes of light swirled in the aftermath, dancing gracefully in the spaces left behind by the vanquished curses. This hauntingly beautiful spectacle presented a stark contrast to the destruction that had preceded it, a delicate reminder of the conflict that had just unfolded. Ghetto surveyed the aftermath, a smile playing at the corners of his lips as he took in the ethereal beauty of the scene. Motes of light danced in the air like fireflies, remnants of the curses that had been obliterated moments before. The shimmering particles swirled and eddied in the gentle breeze, creating an almost hypnotic display set against the backdrop of ruin. "Wonderful," Ghetto murmured, his dark eyes gleaming with interest. He ran a hand through his long, dark hair, his expression a mix of fascination and calculation. "Healing and curse words are both high-level jujutsu techniques. To think that boy has only been learning jujutsu for less than a year and can wield them so effectively." His thoughts trailed off as he considered the implications, his mind racing with possibilities. Rika Orimoto's true form is indeed something extraordinary. Meanwhile, Izuku struggled to process the magnitude of the power he had just unleashed. The megaphone vanished from his grip in a shimmer of cursed energy, leaving him clutching his head with both hands, his face contorted in concentration. Beads of sweat formed on his brow, evidence of the immense mental strain he was under. "This is really hard," Izuku muttered, his voice strained and barely above a whisper. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, he tried to center himself. The cursed power spreads too much. It's hard to focus it. He winced, feeling the residual energy coursing through him like electric currents. His admiration for his friend was palpable as he added, "Inumaki-kun is amazing to do this so effortlessly." As Izuku grappled with regaining his composure, his thoughts turned to his injured friends. Vivid images of their battered bodies flashed in his mind, igniting a fire within him. His teal eyes hardened with determination, and the air around him crackled with energy. Rika's spectral form loomed behind him, a comforting yet intimidating presence, her ethereal body pulsing in response to his emotions. "Yes, my friends are amazing," Izuku said, his voice growing stronger with each word. His fists clenched at his sides, trembling slightly with the intensity of his feelings. "And you. Suddenly, the background shifted dramatically, transforming into a vibrant tapestry of red and black, mirroring the fervor of Izuku's emotions. The colors swirled and pulsed, creating an almost dizzying effect. Ghetto watched this transformation with keen interest, his analytical mind racing. He stood perfectly still, his body tense with anticipation. Yes, he thought, his gaze fixed on Izuku. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, betraying his excitement. An endless mass of cursed power that can be shaped at will. It's truly magnificent. The scene split, offering a close-up view of both Ghetto and Izuku's expressions. On the left, Ghetto's face was a mask of greed and fascination, his eyes narrowed with desire. His lips parted slightly, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper but filled with intense longing. "I want that more and more," he murmured, his tongue darting out to wet his lips. On the right, Izuku's expression was a study in contrasts. One eye, blazing with a mixture of anger and determination, glinted from behind his hand. His teeth were gritted, jaw clenched tight, and the visible eye seemed to glow with an inner fire, reflecting his unbreakable resolve. When he spoke, raw emotion filled his voice, each word embodying the weight of his determination. "I'll beat your ass into a pulp," he declared, the words echoing powerfully across the battlefield. The air around Izuku began to shimmer, cursed energy swirling around him like a protective cocoon. Rika's form seemed to grow larger, her spectral body merging with the energy surrounding Izuku. The motes of light that had been dancing in the air began to swirl faster, drawn towards the vortex of power emanating from the young Jujutsu sorcerer. In a flash of movement that seemed to bend reality itself, Izuku and Rika descended from their elevated position, landing gracefully on the ground before Ghetto. The air crackled with tension as they faced off against their formidable opponent, the very atmosphere heavy with the weight of their impending clash. Ghetto's eyes gleamed with a mixture of curiosity and malice as he observed Izuku. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face as he spoke, his voice dripping with a dangerous blend of admiration and threat. "You're furious, aren't you? Just like you've been since you were 4. Your cursed power must be overflowing, brimming to the point of spilling over." He took a step forward, his long dark hair swaying gently in the breeze. "I can sense it, you know? Your physical abilities have been elevated beyond normal human limits. Your 5 senses sharpened to a razor's edge. You must feel invincible, like you can do anything." His smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed unnaturally sharp in the dim light. "The riffraff is no longer a match for you. So, I guess I'll have to kill you myself." As he finished speaking, a black portal materialized beside him, its edges pulsing with dark energy. From within its depths emerged a curse, its form twisted and grotesque. Clutched in its maw was what appeared to be a playful cloud, though its innocuous appearance belied its true nature. With a swift, fluid motion, Ghetto reached out and plucked the cloud from the curse's mouth, holding it delicately between his fingers. Izuku's eyes narrowed, his body tensing in anticipation. He smoothly drew his katana, the steel gleaming wickedly in the dim light. The blade hummed softly, as if eager for the coming battle. Izuku's voice was steady and determined as he addressed his spectral companion. "Follow my movements, Rika," he commanded, his eyes never leaving Ghetto. Rika's form shimmered in response, her ethereal body coiling protectively around Izuku. Her presence seemed to amplify the tension in the air, the very atmosphere growing heavy with the promise of violence. Ghetto observed this interplay with interest, his dark eyes glinting with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. He began to pace slowly, his movements deliberate and predatory. "You know, mankind stands at the top of the food chain," he mused, his voice taking on a philosophical tone that contrasted sharply with the danger of the situation. "The only thing above them is an imaginary god." He paused, fixing Izuku with an intense stare. "Don't you think that's strange? We, shamans, exist without resorting to imagination. We are the true apex, the real gods of this world." As Ghetto began to speak, the air around them seemed to thicken, charged with the incredible energies emanating from both combatants. The atmosphere felt heavy, almost electric, as if reality itself sensed the immense power about to be unleashed. This moment was tense, setting the stage for an incredible battle with stakes that went far beyond their personal struggle. The fate of not just the two of them, but potentially the entire world, hung in the balance. Izuku and Ghetto faced each other, their eyes locked in a silent but fierce challenge. The world around them seemed to pause, collectively holding its breath. The tension was palpable, like a taut string ready to snap at any moment. Without warning, both fighters sprang into action, their movements blurring with speed and precision that defied human understanding. Izuku lunged forward, his katana whistling through the air. The blade gleamed in the dim light, hungry for its target. Ghetto, with reflexes honed by years of combat, twisted his body just in time, narrowly avoiding the lethal swing. The sword passed by him with only the slightest margin, ruffling his clothes. A brief smirk flashed across his face, but quickly vanished as he sensed another threat behind him. Rika materialized right behind Ghetto, her spectral form shimmering with otherworldly energy. She wielded an ethereal blade of pure cursed energy, ready to strike. The air around her crackled, forming a ghostly halo that cast eerie shadows. Caught between Izuku and Rika, Ghetto's eyes widened slightly, revealing a rare crack in his composure. However, he responded with impressive agility, executing a perfect backflip that showcased his skill. His long, dark hair whipped through the air as he created crucial distance, landing gracefully several feet away from his adversaries. Izuku and Rika seized the moment, pressing their advantage. Their attacks came relentlessly, a whirlwind of strikes that would have overwhelmed a lesser opponent. Izuku's katana clashed against Ghetto's three-section staff, creating a symphony of metal on metal. Sparks erupted with each collision, illuminating the determination on their faces. The sounds of their weapons striking echoed throughout the area, forming a rhythmic accompaniment to their deadly dance. Izuku gritted his teeth, his face a mask of concentration as he pushed Ghetto backward, inch by inch. Sweat beaded on his forehead, trickling down his face as his muscles strained. His green eyes shone with fierce determination, reflecting the resolve that had brought him this far. For a moment, it seemed he might overwhelm his opponent, his assaults growing more intense and precise with every second. But Ghetto was far from defeated. The glint in his eyes signaled a dangerous resolve, a reminder that he was not to be underestimated. In a swift twist of his wrist, he hooked the chain of his staff around Izuku's blade. The maneuver was so quick and unexpected that Izuku barely had time to register what had happened. A sharp yank pulled the young sorcerer off balance, sending him stumbling toward the wall. Seizing the moment, Ghetto followed up with a vicious strike aimed at Izuku's exposed side. The staff whistled through the air, a lethal weapon seeking its target. But Izuku's reflexes, sharpened by Rika's power and his growing skill, allowed him to evade the strike at the last instant. The staff collided with the wall where he had just been, creating a sizable crack in the concrete. Debris and small fragments of stone rained down around them, adding to the chaotic atmosphere. Using the wall as a springboard, Izuku propelled himself back toward Ghetto. His body rotated mid-air, and his katana raised high for a powerful overhead strike. Rika materialized beside him, her spectral form mirroring his movements perfectly, creating an intimidating synchronized attack. Their combined efforts threatened to corner Ghetto once more, presenting him with a challenging pincer movement. Yet, the seasoned curse user was prepared this time. With grim determination, he raised his staff, extending its sections to their full length. Drawing upon his battle-tested skills, he blocked both incoming attacks simultaneously. The impact generated shockwaves that rippled through the air, creating visible distortions in the space around them. The ground beneath their feet trembled, small cracks radiating outward from where their weapons met, underscoring the intensity of this remarkable battle. As they stood locked in this contest of strength, their weapons trembling against each other, Ghetto's voice cut through the tension like a knife. In the end, the monkeys are just trying to look away from those above, he sneered, his words dripping with disdain. His cold and calculating eyes bore into Izuku's with an intensity that would have made a lesser opponent flinch. Izuku's teal eyes flashed with anger, a fire burning within them that matched the intensity of his opponent's gaze. "You're nothing but a psychopath with delusions of grandeur," he spat back, his voice raw with emotion. The words carried the weight of his convictions, a direct challenge to Ghetto's twisted worldview. Ghetto's eyes narrowed dangerously, a storm brewing in their depths. "You're missing the point, Yagi," he snarled, his composure slipping for a moment to reveal the rage beneath. As he spoke, something shifted in the air around them. A slimy tentacle, seemingly materializing from nowhere, suddenly wrapped around Izuku's leg. Izuku looked down in horror to see a squid-like curse rapidly enveloping his body. Its grotesque form pulsed with malevolent energy, each movement sending shivers of disgust through him. The young sorcerer tried to slash at the curse, but his blade passed through it ineffectively, the curse's form too amorphous to be damaged by conventional means. The momentary distraction was all Ghetto needed. With a triumphant grin that sent chills down Izuku's spine, he swung his staff in a wide arc. The metal whistled through the air, a deadly silver blur aimed directly at Izuku's unprotected side. The impact was devastating. It sent Izuku flying, his body slamming into the wall with a sickening thud that echoed through the area. The breath was knocked from his lungs, leaving him gasping and disoriented. Pain blossomed across his side, and he could feel warm blood seeping through his torn clothing. Before he could even catch his breath or regain his bearings, Ghetto was upon him again. The curse user's staff was raised high, poised for a devastating vertical strike that threatened to end the fight, and possibly Izuku's life. In one brutal moment, time seemed to slow as the staff descended, its shadow looming over Izuku's prone form. The young sorcerer's eyes widened, his body refusing to respond to his desperate commands to move. But just as all seemed lost, a familiar spectral hand reached out. Rika, her form pulsing with protective fury, grabbed Izuku. Her touch was cold yet comforting, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. With strength born of desperation and the unbreakable bond between them, Rika yanked Izuku away from danger. They moved faster than the eye could follow, putting much-needed space between them and Ghetto. As they retreated, Izuku caught a glimpse of Ghetto's face, twisted with frustration and rage. Catching his breath, Izuku's voice rang out, filled with conviction and a hint of frustration. What I want isn't adoration, but to choose people. The weak hide away from the strong just because the majority sometimes oppresses them. His teal eyes flashed with determination, challenging Ghetto's twisted worldview. But that doesn't mean we should discard them or treat them as less than human. Ghetto's face contorted with disgust, his voice dripping with contempt. What I'm saying is the impediment of these monkeys is unpleasant to the point of nausea. His dark eyes narrowed, scanning Izuku for any sign of weakness. You're still too naive, Yagi. The world isn't as simple as you'd like to believe. Izuku stood his ground, his resolve strengthening with each passing moment. Maybe I am naive, he admitted, but I'd rather be naive and fight for what's right than give up on humanity like you have. Izuku, Izuku. Rika's ethereal voice echoed with concern, her ghostly form shimmering with anxiety. Izuku wiped the blood from his face, his movements steady despite the pain that radiated through his body. His teal eyes, filled with determination, met Rika's spectral gaze. I'm fine, I got used to it, he reassured his spectral companion, his voice a mix of determination and weariness. The taste of iron lingered in his mouth, a stark reminder of the intensity of the battle. Ghetto's lips curled into a grin, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. So, no more talking? He taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. The air crackled with tension as both fighters readied themselves for the next clash, the very atmosphere seeming to hold its breath in anticipation. Rika gently lowered Izuku to the ground, her spectral form shimmering with protective energy. Her touch, though intangible, seemed to infuse Izuku with renewed strength. Without hesitation, Izuku sprang into action, his movements fluid and precise as he danced towards Ghetto. His feet barely seemed to touch the ground, each step calculated and purposeful. The curse user, anticipating an attack, swung his staff in a vertical arc. The weapon whistled through the air, a deadly arc of cursed energy trailing in its wake. But Izuku had already vanished, his speed leaving nothing but an afterimage. He's faster. Ghetto's thoughts raced as he felt Izuku's presence behind him. His eyes widened in surprise, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. In a split second, Izuku channeled his cursed energy into his katana, giving it a vibrant pink hue that seemed to pulse with life. The air hummed with power as he swung the blade, the very fabric of reality seeming to warp around the energized weapon. But Ghetto was ready. Their weapons clashed in a burst of energy, the impact sending shockwaves through the air. Sparks flew as cursed energy met cursed energy, illuminating their faces in an eerie glow. To Izuku's horror, His katana shattered into pieces, the fragments scattering across the ground like broken dreams. Each shard seemed to catch the light, twinkling mockingly as they fell. Ghetto's mocking laughter filled the air, a sound that seemed to chill the very marrow in Izuku's bones. "Ah, that's not good," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "You can't use that much curse energy at once. The vessel can't handle it. Did Satoru not teach you that?" His words were sharp, designed to cut deeper than any blade, each syllable laced with venom. As the taunt hung in the air, Izuku's mind raced back to a pivotal moment in his training. The memory unfolded vividly before him, a beacon of hope in the heat of battle, its clarity a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding him. In his mind's eye, he saw himself standing before Gojo-sensei, curiosity burning in his eyes. The training room was bathed in soft light, the air thick with the scent of incense and old books. "The first time I used curse energy," Izuku began, his voice tinged with excitement and a hint of confusion. "I saw someone trying to assault a girl. I was so angry, so focused on saving her. When I punched the attacker, black lightning burst from my fist. What was that power?" Gojo's surprise was palpable, even behind his ever-present bandages. His eyebrows shot up, disappearing into his shock of white hair. "What? He achieved that move on his first use of cursed energy." The thought echoed in his mind before he spoke aloud, his voice a mix of disbelief and pride. "It's called Black Flash." Black Flash. Izuku's voice was filled with wonder and confusion, his teal eyes wide with curiosity. Gojo's explanation was crisp and clear, his tone taking on the cadence of a seasoned teacher. Black Flash is a distortion in space that occurs when cursed energy is applied within 0.0000001 seconds of a physical hit. When a sorcerer achieves this, their cursed energy flashes black, and the destructive power of their strike is multiplied by 2.5. It's essentially an impact enhancer. A smile played on Gojo's lips as he ruffled Izuku's curly hair, his touch affectionate and encouraging. "But what's more impressive is that you hit that move in the first place. It's a rare feat, even for experienced sorcerers." "Actually, I hit that move twice," Izuku admitted, his voice a mix of pride and uncertainty, a slight blush coloring his cheeks. "What?" Gojo's exclamation of surprise echoed through the memory, his visible eye widening in shock. As the flashback faded, determination surged through Izuku like a tidal wave. The memory of Gojo's words, his encouragement, and his belief in Izuku's potential acted as a catalyst, igniting a fire within him. "Actually, there is something he taught me," he thought, his eyes locking onto Ghetto with newfound resolve, a steel-like determination glinting in his teal depths. Ghetto, oblivious to Izuku's inner realization, continued his taunting. Little by little, his words were abruptly cut off as Izuku's fist connected with his face. The impact was devastating, amplified by the crackling black energy of the Black Flash. The air itself seemed to warp around Izuku's fist, time slowing to a crawl in that infinitesimal moment of contact. Black Flash. Izuku's mind screamed in triumph as he felt the familiar surge of power coursing through his body. The force of the blow sent Ghetto flying backward, his body carving a path through the debris-strewn battlefield. Chunks of concrete and dust billowed in his wake as he skidded across the ground, finally coming to rest in a cloud of debris. As the dust settled, Ghetto lay amid the rubble, the side of his face marred by dirt and the beginnings of a nasty bruise. "You're good?" he said, straining his voice, a mix of pain and grudging respect evident in his tone. As the dust settled, Izuku stood tall, his chest heaving with exertion but his eyes burning with determination. Sweat glistened on his brow, mixing with the dirt and blood that stained his face. He turned to Rika, his spectral companion hovering nearby, her ethereal form pulsing with concern and pride. "Rika," he said, his voice steady despite the intensity of the fight, "take that weapon and absorb it into yourself." He gestured towards Ghetto's fallen 3-section staff, the weapon lying innocuously among the debris, its metallic surface glinting in the fading light. Rika nodded, her ethereal form shimmering as she created a swirling black portal. The air around them seemed to bend and warp, reality itself yielding to the power of the cursed spirit. The staff lifted off the ground, drawn into the vortex of cursed energy as if pulled by an invisible hand. As it disappeared into Rika's spectral form, Izuku allowed himself a small smile, a glimmer of hope in the midst of this grueling battle. That should be useful in the future, he thought, his mind already racing with possibilities for their next move in this high-stakes battle. Izuku stood facing Ghetto, his legs trembling slightly from exhaustion but his spirit unbroken. The young sorcerer's teal eyes blazed with fierce determination, reflecting the resolve burning in his heart. Izuku's voice, raw with emotion, echoed across the war-torn battlefield as he shouted, "I don't know everything. I can't speak for shamans outside the college. I don't know if you're wrong or right." His fists clenched at his sides, knuckles white with tension. "But for me, keeping my friends safe, staying alive, that's what matters most." The wind whipped around him, tousling his messy black hair as he took a step forward, his stance unwavering despite the overwhelming presence of his opponent. "And to protect that reality, I'll do whatever it takes, even if it means killing you." His words hung in the air, charged with the weight of his convictions. The atmosphere seemed to crackle with energy, a tangible manifestation of the clash of ideals between the two sorcerers. Ghetto's face twisted into a sneer, his eyes glinting with a mixture of amusement and malice. The scar across his forehead seemed to pulse in the dim light, a reminder of past battles and unresolved conflicts. Without uttering a word, he raised his hand, fingers splayed wide. The very air around them shimmered and distorted as if Ghetto's will was warping reality itself. Suddenly, the space between them erupted with activity. A horde of curses materialized, their twisted forms coalescing from thin air like nightmarish sculptures taking shape. They were a truly horrifying sight, writhing masses of darkness, each unique in its grotesque appearance. Some had multiple eyes glowing with malevolent intent, while others sported razor-sharp claws that reached out hungrily toward Izuku. The curses moved with an unnatural fluidity, their bodies seeming to defy the laws of physics as they slithered and crawled across the ground. The air grew heavy with their presence, filled with an oppressive aura that seemed to sap the strength from Izuku's limbs. Izuku's hand instinctively moved to grasp his katana, but his fingers closed around empty air. A sudden realization struck him. His trusted weapon had been shattered in the fierce battle. As frustration welled up inside him, something else caught his attention, drawing his focus away from the loss of his blade. A faint, ethereal blue light pulsed within the swirling mass of curses, barely visible to the naked eye. It was as if each curse contained a trapped firefly, its light struggling to break free from the oppressive darkness surrounding it. The sight was both beautiful and unsettling, a stark contrast to the chaos of the battlefield. As Izuku stared, transfixed by the otherworldly display, his senses sharpened. Suddenly, he heard it, a chorus of desperate, anguished cries that seemed to emanate from within the curses themselves. The voices were faint at first, like whispers carried on the wind, but they grew louder and more distinct with each passing second. The young sorcerer felt a chill run down his spine as he listened to the haunting melody of trapped souls. Each cry told a story of pain, fear, and longing for release. It was a sound that would haunt his dreams for years to come, a stark reminder of the true nature of the curses they fought against. His heart clenched at the sound, a mixture of pity and determination washing over him. Izuku took a deep breath, steadying himself against the overwhelming surge of emotions. Without conscious thought, he closed his eyes and stretched out his hand towards the oncoming horde of curses. As he did so, a soft, ethereal pink hue began to emanate from his fingertips, pulsing with a gentle yet undeniably powerful rhythm. The air around Izuku seemed to shimmer and warp as if reality itself was bending to his will. The curses, once a chaotic mass of malevolent energy, began to swirl and dance around his outstretched hand. It was as if they were drawn by an invisible force, irresistibly pulled towards the young sorcerer. As the curses gathered, they formed a mesmerizing vortex of energy. It was a whirlpool of darkness and light, shadow and radiance, swirling together in a hypnotic dance. Gradually, this swirling mass began to condense, compressing into a glowing pink sphere that hovered just above Izuku's palm. The sight was truly awe-inspiring, a perfect balance of beauty and terror. The sphere pulsed with raw power, sending out waves of energy that made the air crackle and hum. It was as if Izuku held a miniature star in his hand, a concentrated essence of curse energy that both attracted and repelled. Izuku's face was a mask of concentration, his brow furrowed and lips pressed into a thin line. Despite the immense power he was channeling, there was a serene quality to his expression, as if he had found a moment of peace amidst the chaos of battle. The pink glow cast strange shadows across the battlefield, painting everything in surreal hues. It reflected in Izuku's eyes as he slowly opened them, giving him an otherworldly appearance. At that moment, with the condensed curse energy hovering above his palm, they formed a vortex of energy, a whirlpool of darkness and light that gradually condensed into a glowing pink sphere hovering just above his palm. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying, a testament to the raw power Izuku was channeling. Ghetto's eyes widened in shock, his usual composure cracking for a moment. The confident smirk that had adorned his face moments ago faded, replaced by a look of disbelief and growing concern. "What? Curse manipulation?" he exclaimed mentally, his voice tinged with a mix of awe and fear. How is this possible? His mind raced, trying to comprehend what he was witnessing. The air around Izuku shimmered with an energy that felt eerily familiar, yet fundamentally different from anything Ghetto had encountered before. He watched as Izuku effortlessly manipulated the cursed energy, bending it to his will in a way that should have been impossible for anyone but Ghetto himself. "Unless," Ghetto muttered, his brow furrowing in concentration. The gears in his mind turned rapidly, piecing together the puzzle before him. Could he possess some innate technique that allows him to copy abilities? The thought sent a chill down Ghetto's spine, the implications of such a power too vast to fully grasp in the heat of battle. As Ghetto grappled with this revelation, Izuku stood calmly, his face a mask of determination. In his hand, he held a pulsating orb of energy, its surface rippling with the trapped souls within. The orb glowed with an otherworldly light, casting eerie shadows across the battlefield. Izuku gazed at the orb, his teal eyes reflecting the swirling energies within. He could feel the weight of the trapped souls, not just physically, but emotionally. Their pain, their anguish, their desperate desire for release. It all washed over him in waves, threatening to overwhelm his senses. Taking a deep breath, Izuku centered himself. His voice, when he spoke, was soft but resolute. Each word was imbued with compassion and purpose, carrying the weight of his conviction. Souls tortured by pain, anguish, and regret. He began, his voice growing stronger with each syllable. "I will free you from this curse and guide you to peace." As he spoke, the air around him began to shimmer, charged with an energy that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of reality. The orb in his hand pulsed in response, its glow intensifying. "Jujutsu technique," Izuku continued, his voice now ringing clear across the battlefield. "Release of suffering souls." As the final syllable left Izuku's lips, a brilliant white light erupted from the sphere in his hand. It was as if a miniature sun had suddenly burst into existence, its radiance so intense that both Izuku and Ghetto were momentarily blinded. The light spread rapidly, washing over the ravaged battlefield like a tidal wave of pure energy. The air itself seemed to hum with power as the light touched everything in its path. Izuku could feel the warmth on his skin, a gentle caress that seemed to reach deep into his very soul. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear the spots from his vision as the initial burst of light began to fade. As their sight slowly returned, adjusting to the normal light once more, a breathtaking sight unfolded before them. Countless pinpricks of light, each no bigger than a firefly, began to rise from the ground. They floated upwards, gently at first, then with increasing speed. Izuku realized with a start that each tiny spark represented a soul, finally freed from its cursed prison. The spectacle was mesmerizing. It was as if a galaxy had been born on Earth, only to ascend towards the heavens. The lights swirled and danced as they rose, creating patterns of indescribable beauty. Some merged together, forming brighter, larger lights that pulsed with energy. Others spiraled upwards in intricate patterns, leaving trails of softly glowing residue in their wake. Izuku found himself holding his breath, afraid that even the slightest movement might disrupt this magical moment. He could feel the weight of countless years of suffering being lifted, carried away by these ascending lights. The air seemed to grow lighter and cleaner, as if the very atmosphere was being purified by their passage. Even Ghetto, His face, usually set in a mask of cruel determination, seemed momentarily awestruck by the display. His eyes widened, reflecting the dancing lights, and for a brief instant, a flicker of something almost like regret passed across his features. As the last of the lights disappeared into the afternoon sky, a profound silence fell over the battlefield. It was as if the world itself was pausing to acknowledge the magnitude of what had just occurred. Izuku felt a deep sense of peace wash over him, mixed with a bittersweet realization that this moment, beautiful as it was, marked the end of something significant. Izuku stood there, breathing heavily but filled with a newfound confidence. The release of the souls had taken a toll on him, but it had also shown him the true extent of his growing powers. He turned to face Ghetto, his eyes reflecting a mix of determination and compassion. "Is that all you've got?" he challenged, his voice steady despite the exertion. Ghetto's lips curled into a sardonic smile, a hint of begrudging respect flickering in his dark eyes. "Aren't you becoming quite the egotist?" He drawled, his tone a mixture of amusement and contempt. The air around him grew heavy, charged with malevolent energy that made the hairs on the back of Izuku's neck stand on end. "But I suppose that self-affirmation is crucial for survival." Ghetto's eyes narrowed dangerously, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Very well, if you're so eager to die, I'll oblige." Izuku took a step forward, his muscles tensing in anticipation of the next clash. His heart raced, but he kept his breathing steady, channeling the techniques Gojo had taught him. However, Ghetto's next words stopped him in his tracks, sending a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "Wait," Ghetto said, his voice taking on a tone of dark amusement. He raised a hand, fingers splayed as if presenting a grand spectacle. "I won't compromise quality for quantity. Tell me, do you know about the special classes?" He paused, savoring the moment of suspense, watching his confusion and then dawning realization spread across Izuku's face. "There are 4 humans classified as such, and 16 curses. What you're about to face is one of them." With a dramatic flourish, Ghetto raised his hand once more. The air around them shimmered and distorted, reality bending to Ghetto's will like a mirage in the desert. From the void, a terrifying figure began to emerge, the avatar of Tamamonome, a curse of legendary power and malevolence. As the curse took form, Izuku felt a wave of dread wash over him, as tangible as a bucket of ice water. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with malevolent energy that made his skin crawl and his breath catch in his throat. He could sense the immense power radiating from the creature, far beyond anything he had faced before. Its form was a twisted amalgamation of nightmares, with razor-sharp claws that gleamed in the dim light and eyes that glowed with an otherworldly hunger. Izuku's heart raced, his palms grew sweaty, and for a moment, he felt his courage waver. The sheer malevolence emanating from the curse was overwhelming, threatening to crush his spirit. But even as fear threatened to overwhelm him, he clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms, and steeled his resolve. The faces of his friends, his mentors, and all those who believed in him flashed through his mind. Itsuka's warm smile, Gojo's confident grin, Maki's determined gaze. He had come too far and fought too hard to back down now. Ghetto's eyes gleamed with malevolent intent, a wicked smile playing on his lips as he raised his arms. The air around them crackled with tension, dark energy swirling around his fingertips like wisps of smoke. Izuku felt a chill run down his spine as Ghetto's voice, filled with cruel anticipation, echoed across the battlefield. "And on top of that," Ghetto announced, his words dripping with malice, "I will turn all 4,461 curses that I have into a single one and throw that at you. Cursed spirit manipulation maximum, Uzumaki." As the words left Ghetto's lips, the air itself seemed to warp and twist, as if reality was being torn apart at the seams. A massive vortex of swirling curses coalesced into a single, terrifying tornado. The sheer power emanating from the attack was overwhelming, causing the ground beneath them to tremble and crack like thin ice. The sky darkened, as if nature itself cowered in the face of such malevolent power, clouds swirling ominously overhead. Ghetto's lips curled into a cruel smile as he watched Izuku's reaction, savoring the moment like a connoisseur savoring a fine wine. "Yagi," he taunted, his words dripping with satisfaction. I'm very glad I decided to kill you before you became able to truly make use of Rika or Emoto. His eyes glinted with a mixture of triumph and twisted curiosity, eager to see how Izuku would face this seemingly insurmountable challenge. Izuku, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat, turned to face Rika. The spectral form of his childhood friend hovered nearby, her ethereal presence a mix of comfort and sorrow. Her wispy form flickered and wavered, like a candle flame in the wind, as if struggling against the oppressive energy surrounding them. He approached her slowly, his eyes filled with determination and a hint of fear, each step feeling heavier than the last. Rika! Izuku's voice was soft but resolute as he reached out to embrace her ghostly form. His hand passed through her, but he could feel a warmth, a connection that transcended the physical. It was like touching a memory, tangible yet intangible at the same time. Thank you for always protecting me. Thank you for liking me. His words were heavy with emotion, each syllable carrying the weight of their shared history. The joy, the pain, the unbreakable bond that had brought them to this moment. Lend me your power one last time. I want to stop this guy. Izuku's teal eyes shimmered with unshed tears as he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. The air around them seemed to pulse with the intensity of his emotions, creating ripples in the fabric of reality. I don't care for anything else after that except becoming a pro-hero. I'll give you all my future, my heart, and my body. We're really going to be together forever from now on. He took a deep breath, his next words filled with a mix of love and determination that seemed to make the very air vibrate. I love you, Rika. Let's go together. As if responding to the depth of Izuku's feelings, a burst of cursed energy erupted from Rika. Her spectral form shimmered and pulsed, growing more solid and defined with each passing second. The air around them crackled with power, small arcs of energy dancing between Izuku and Rika like miniature lightning bolts. Slowly, her single eye opened, glowing with an otherworldly light that seemed to pierce through the darkness surrounding them. Izuku! Izuku! Rika's voice, distorted yet unmistakably filled with emotion, rang out. It echoed across the battlefield, a haunting melody of love and determination that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of reality. I love you so much. A pink beam of cursed energy began to form inside Rika's mouth, growing in intensity with each passing second. It started as a small spark, but quickly grew into a blinding light that cast long shadows across the devastated landscape. The air around them hummed with power, the very fabric of reality seeming to bend under the weight of their combined will. Small objects around them began to float, caught in the gravitational pull of their combined power, creating a surreal scene of suspended debris. Ghetto's eyes widened in shock and anger as he realized what was happening. His composure, usually unshakable, cracked for a moment as he watched the display of power before him. He's sacrificing himself to remove the limit on the cursed power. The thought raced through his mind, filling him with a mix of rage and begrudging admiration. So that's how it is. Damn womanizer. Izuku's voice, calm and steady despite the chaos around them, cut through Ghetto's thoughts like a knife. How rude. This is pure love. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of his unwavering conviction. At that moment, Izuku stood tall, his eyes burning with a fierce determination that seemed to challenge fate itself. Yeah, I'm on the side of justice, Ghetto snarled, his face contorting with fury as he unleashed a tornado of curses toward Izuku and Rika. The massive vortex of malevolent energy roared toward them, tearing up the ground and leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Trees were uprooted, rocks pulverized, and the very air seemed to scream in agony as the cursed energy tore through it. The world seemed to hold its breath as Rika's pink beam of energy clashed with Ghetto's attack. For a moment, the two forces struggled against each other, creating a dazzling display of light and power that illuminated the battlefield like fireworks. The clash of energies sent shockwaves rippling through the air, causing the very earth to tremble beneath their feet. Then, slowly but surely, the pink beam began to overwhelm Ghetto's cursed tornado. It pushed back against the swirling mass of curses, its light growing brighter and more intense with each passing second. The air crackled with energy as the two attacks collided, creating a massive explosion that lit up the sky like a second sun. The shockwave rippled outward, shaking the very foundations of the earth beneath their feet and sending debris flying in all directions. As the blinding light began to fade, Izuku felt his strength leaving him. His vision blurred, and the world around him became a hazy mix of light and shadow. He swayed on his feet, his body feeling as heavy as lead. With the last of his energy, he whispered, "Finally, it's over." His voice was barely audible over the ringing in his ears, a mix of relief and exhaustion evident in his tone. Then, darkness claimed him as he collapsed to the ground, the echoes of the titanic clash still ringing in his ears. The last thing he saw before his eyes closed was Rika's form, shimmering and beautiful, reaching out towards him. As consciousness slipped away, a small smile played on his lips, a testament to the bond that had carried them through this impossible battle. The world faded to black, leaving only the lingering warmth of Rika's presence and the faint hope of a future yet to be written. Time skip. The alley was a grim tableau of destruction, shrouded in darkness and heavy with the stench of blood and charred flesh. Ghetto, once the epitome of grace and power, now staggered forward like a marionette with cut strings. His clothes, once pristine, hung in tatters from his battered frame, revealing a patchwork of burns and lacerations that marred his once handsome features. Where his left arm should have been, there was only a charred stump, a grotesque reminder of the ferocious battle he had just endured. Despite his grievous injuries, a manic gleam still burned in Ghetto's eyes as he stumbled towards the wall, using it for support. His breath came in ragged gasps, each inhalation a painful struggle, yet a twisted smile played on his cracked and bloodied lips. "Wonderful," he wheezed, his voice a discordant mixture of agony and ecstasy. "If I have Rika, I won't need to be stingy with curses anymore. This power, this is indeed what I need to change the world. Truly wonderful." His words carried a fervent intensity as if he were reciting a sacred mantra. As he slid down the wall, leaving a grisly smear of blood in his wake, Ghetto's keen senses, honed by years of Jujutsu sorcery, picked up on a familiar presence. Even in his weakened state, he didn't need to turn his head to identify the newcomer. Next time for sure," he called out, his voice a paradoxical mix of defiance and resignation. "You're late, Satoru." Gojo approached, his footsteps echoing ominously in the quiet alley. For once, his face was uncovered, the customary bandages conspicuously absent. His piercing blue eyes, usually hidden from the world, were fixed on Ghetto, a maelstrom of emotions swirling within their depths. "To think you'd checkmate me," Ghetto continued, his voice growing weaker with each syllable. "Are my families safe?" Gojo's response was measured, his tone carefully neutral, betraying none of the turmoil that surely raged within him. "They all ran away. You gave the same orders to the ones in Kyoto, right?" A dry chuckle escaped Ghetto's lips, followed by a wet cough that spattered blood on the grimy concrete. "Well, it's because I'm kind of like you. You've sent those two specifically so that they'd be done in by me and trigger Yagi's explosion, right?" He gestured weakly with his remaining hand, wincing as the movement sent a fresh wave of pain cascading through his body. "It's because I trusted you," Gojo replied, his voice soft but firm, laden with unspoken emotions. "I knew you wouldn't kill young shamans for no reason." "Kukuku," Ghetto laughed, the sound more akin to a death rattle than genuine mirth. "Trust, huh? To think you still have some left for me. I'm returning this." With a flick of his wrist, he sent a small object spinning through the air towards Gojo. Gojo caught it deftly, his eyes widening slightly as he recognized Izuku's ID card. The plastic was scratched and smeared with blood, but the young boy's face was still clearly visible. "So that elementary school was also your work. You're hopeless," he said, his voice tinged with a complex mixture of disappointment and resignation. "I guess," Ghetto replied, his eyes beginning to glaze over as his life force ebbed away. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and shared history. The weight of their past, friendship, and diverging paths hung in the air like a tangible presence. Finally, Gojo broke the oppressive quiet with a simple question. "Any last words?" Ghetto's response came slowly, each word seemingly dragged from the depths of his fading consciousness. "No matter what anyone says, I hate all the monkeys, but it's not like I was detesting anyone from the college. It's just, in this world, I can't laugh from my heart at all." His words were filled with a bitter resignation, a final confession of the despair that had driven him to this point. "Suguru," Gojo murmured, squatting down beside his fallen friend. He leaned in close, his lips almost brushing Ghetto's ear as he whispered words too soft for anyone else to hear. The intimate gesture was a stark contrast to the brutality of their recent confrontation. Surprise flickered across Ghetto's face, followed by a weak chuckle that seemed to cost him his last reserves of strength. "At least you curse at me a little at the very end." Those were his final words. Gojo remained still for a moment, his face a mask of conflicting emotions: sorrow, anger, regret, and perhaps a hint of relief. Then, with a swift, decisive movement, he drew his blade across Ghetto's throat. The sound of steel on flesh seemed to echo in the stillness of the alley, a final punctuation to their tragic story. As Ghetto's life ebbed away, the alley fell into an eerie silence. The only sound was the soft patter of blood dripping onto the cold concrete, a grim metronome marking the passing of a once great Jujutsu sorcerer. The air seemed to grow heavier, as if the weight of what had transpired was settling over the scene like a shroud. Chapter 8. The light that shines brightly. Present time. Inside Izuku's mind, darkness enveloped Izuku, a thick, oppressive blackness that seemed to swallow all light. He spun around, his heart racing as he tried to make sense of his surroundings. The void was absolute, pressing in on him from all sides, like a living entity trying to suffocate him. "Where am I?" His voice echoed in the emptiness, a tremor of uncertainty in his words. The sound seemed to be swallowed by the darkness, leaving him feeling more alone than ever. "It's our fault." A haunting whisper slithered through the darkness, sending chills down Izuku's spine. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a ghostly accusation that made his skin crawl. He clenched his fists, gathering his courage, feeling the familiar tingle of cursed energy at his fingertips. It was a small comfort in this sea of nothingness. "Show yourself," he demanded, his voice stronger now, echoing through the abyss. The words hung in the air, unanswered for what felt like an eternity. Suddenly, a figure materialized before him, emerging from the shadows like a ghost. Izuku's breath caught in his throat as he recognized his younger self, a mirror image from the day of Rika's funeral. The boy stood motionless, his teal eyes devoid of life, dark circles etched beneath them like bruises. His hair, a mess of black and green strands, clung to his forehead, still damp from tears or rain. Izuku couldn't tell which. The crisp black suit hung loosely on the child's frame, a stark contrast to the pallor of his skin. It was a haunting reminder of the worst day of his life, a day he had tried so hard to forget. "She can't be free." The younger Izuku's voice was hollow, barely above a whisper, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 sorrows. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with unspoken pain. Izuku stepped closer, confusion and dread mingling in his gut. The air around them seemed to thicken, making each movement feel like wading through water. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a thunderous echo in the silence. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, his voice wavering, reaching out to his younger self. His hand trembled as it neared the boy, unsure if he wanted to touch this apparition from his past. The child's eyes seemed to bore into him, filled with an ancient sorrow that no child should ever know. They were windows to a pain Izuku had long buried, which now resurfaces with startling clarity. "We are the ones who are tying her down in this world." His voice grew louder, more frantic with each word, echoing the pain that Izuku had buried deep within himself. The young boy's hands clenched into fists, his whole body trembling with the force of his emotions. "Set her free. Set Rika free." The anguished cry reverberated through the darkness, shaking Izuku to his core. The words seemed to vibrate through his very being, resonating with a truth he had long denied. He reached out, wanting to comfort his younger self, to understand, but his hand passed through the boy as if he were made of smoke. "Izuku!" A distant voice cut through the void, familiar yet distorted. It sounded muffled, as if coming from underwater. "Izuku!" It grew louder, more insistent, pulling him away from the haunting vision. The darkness began to swirl around him, the figure of his younger self starting to fade. "Izuku!" With a violent gasp, Izuku's eyes flew open. The darkness of his mind gave way to the dim afternoon sky of Jujutsu High. He found himself lying on the cold, cracked concrete of what was once a battleground. His body ached, every muscle screaming in protest. A stark reminder of the intense fight he had just endured. The taste of blood lingered in his mouth, and he could feel the sticky warmth of it on his skin. 3 familiar faces swam into focus above him, their expressions a mix of concern and relief. Inumaki, Panda, and Maki hovered over him, their worried faces a stark contrast to the blue sky behind them. Izuku blinked, trying to reconcile the peaceful scene with the chaos of moments ago. The transition was jarring, leaving him disoriented and confused. Maki leaned in closer, her face uncharacteristically soft without her usual glasses. Her hair, usually tied back neatly, was disheveled from the battle and cascaded down her shoulders. A small cut on her cheek was still bleeding, but she seemed to pay it no mind. "Hey Izuku, are you okay?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. The worry in her usually stern voice touched something deep within Izuku. "Get a hold of yourself, Izuku!" Panda exclaimed, his one large, soft paw gently shaking Izuku's shoulder. The urgency in his usually jovial voice was palpable. His black and white fur was matted with dirt and what looked suspiciously like blood, a testament to the battle they had just fought. "Mustard!" Inumaki chimed in, his cursed speech carrying a note of worry. Despite the seemingly random word, Izuku could sense the genuine concern behind it. Inumaki's bandages were slightly loose, revealing glimpses of his cursed mouth. He attempted to sit up, wincing at the pain that shot through his body. Every movement felt like a monumental effort, his muscles protesting against even the slightest strain. I'm all right," he managed to say, his voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't entirely true. The vision had shaken him more than any physical battle could, leaving him feeling vulnerable and uncertain in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Izuku suddenly bolted upright, his body screaming in protest with every movement. A sharp, searing pain shot through his side, but he gritted his teeth and ignored it, his emerald eyes widening as he took in the state of his friends. The battlefield around them was a scene of destruction, cracked concrete, and scattered debris painting a grim picture of the intense fight they had just endured. "They still need more healing," he thought frantically, his mind racing. His gaze darted from one to another, assessing their injuries with growing concern. "Maki-san, Inumaki-kun." His voice trailed off, hoarse and barely above a whisper, as his eyes landed on Panda. "Ah, Panda-san, your arm didn't heal," Izuku shouted, his voice cracking with worry and exhaustion. The sight of his friend's missing limb sent a fresh wave of panic through him, making his heart race even faster. Maki, her usually neat appearance now disheveled with hair tangled and matted with sweat and dirt, couldn't help but smile at Izuku's outburst. Her glasses were missing, revealing eyes that sparkled with amusement and gratitude. "Calm down," she said, her tone softer than usual. "We're all doing better than you, at least." Her gaze lingered on him, silently acknowledging the sacrifice he had made for them. A small cut on her cheek had stopped bleeding, but the dried blood was a stark reminder of their close call. Izuku felt a blush creep up his neck, suddenly all too aware of his appearance. His Jujutsu high uniform, once pristine and a source of pride, was now torn and bloodied. His skin was covered in a mixture of dirt, sweat, and blood, creating a macabre canvas that told the story of their battle. He let out a nervous chuckle, rubbing his head sheepishly, wincing as his fingers brushed against a particularly tender spot. "Of course, all of you guys look better than me," he mumbled, a hint of pride sneaking into his voice despite his embarrassment. "I did just save your asses, after all." Panda let out a rumbling laugh, the sound oddly comforting in the aftermath of the battle. The large creature shifted, his movements carefully to avoid aggravating unseen injuries. He gestured towards his missing arm with his remaining paw, the movement oddly graceful for such a large being. "Well, about this," he said, his voice carrying a note of resignation mixed with humor. "I can fix it later, unlike these two fragile humans." He glanced at Maki and Inumaki, his eyes twinkling with mischief despite the gravity of their situation. Inumaki, his bandages slightly askew revealing glimpses of his cursed mouth, responded with a muffled "kelp" that somehow managed to convey both indignation and agreement. His eyes crinkled at the corners, suggesting a smile hidden beneath the bandages. Panda's expression softened as he turned back to Izuku, his large, expressive eyes filled with genuine gratitude. "Thanks for helping us," he said, his voice low and sincere. "We owe you one, kid." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their shared experience and newfound bond. Izuku felt a lump form in his throat, overwhelmed by the gratitude and camaraderie. He opened his mouth to respond but found himself at a loss for words. The emotions of the moment, relief, exhaustion, pride, and a deep sense of connection to his friends, seemed too complex to express. Instead, he nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips despite the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm him. "Izuku," the voice, soft yet clear, cut through the chatter of the group like a gentle breeze. Izuku and his friends turned their heads in unison, their eyes widening as they spotted Rika sitting a few feet away. Her form was ethereal, almost translucent in the fading light of the afternoon, her silhouette shimmering like a mirage against the war-torn backdrop of Jujutsu High. Izuku's heart skipped a beat, a mixture of emotions flooding through him. He slowly rose to his feet, wincing slightly as his battered body protested the movement. Every muscle ached, a stark reminder of the intense battle they had just endured. "Sorry for keeping you waiting, Rika-chan," he said, his voice gentle and tinged with a mixture of affection and guilt. His green eyes, usually bright and determined, now held a hint of sadness as they met Rika's gaze. Panda's large, expressive eyes darted between Izuku and the ghostly figure of Rika. His fuzzy brows furrowed in concern, one paw absently rubbing where his missing arm should be. "What is it, Izuku?" he inquired, his tone laced with concern and curiosity. The normally jovial Panda's voice was uncharacteristically serious, sensing the gravity of the moment. Izuku scratched the back of his head nervously, a sheepish grin spreading across his face. A light blush dusted his freckled cheeks as he realized the weight of what he was about to say. "Well, you see," he began, his words coming out in a rush, tumbling over each other in his haste to explain. "For her to lend me her power, I kinda promised Rika-chan I'd go to the same place as her." He let out a nervous chuckle, his eyes darting between his friends' faces, gauging their reactions. There was a moment of stunned silence, the air heavy with shock and disbelief. Then, Maki's voice cut through the air like a whip, shattering the tense quiet. "Eh, what were you thinking, idiot?" she shouted, her face a mixture of disbelief and anger. Her eyes glinted in rage, but the worry in her voice betrayed her true feelings. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, trembling slightly with the force of her emotions. "It was a spur-of-the-moment thing," Izuku exclaimed, his eyes comically morphing into arrows as he waved his arms up and down like a frantic hummingbird. His black hair, matted with sweat and blood, bounced with each frantic movement. "You can't blame me." His voice cracked slightly, a mix of embarrassment and desperation coloring his words. Maki's eye twitched, a prominent tick mark appearing on her forehead. Her usually neat appearance was disheveled from the battle, adding to her intimidating aura. "Doesn't mean you have to die from it," she retorted, her voice rising with each word. The concern in her tone was palpable, despite her harsh words. As the argument unfolded, a mesmerizing transformation began to take place. Rika's cursed form, once a terrifying visage of power and rage, started to dissolve. Like mist dissipating in the morning sun, the monstrous features melted away. It was as if an invisible artist was erasing the nightmarish aspects, revealing the true form beneath. The group fell silent, transfixed by the sight. Even Maki's anger seemed to evaporate as they watched Rika's true form emerge. Inumaki's eyes widened behind his bandages, while Panda leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. Where once stood a fearsome cursed spirit, now sat the form of a 10-year-old girl. The transformation was as breathtaking as it was sudden, leaving the group in awe. Rika's long, brown hair cascaded down her back like a silken waterfall, catching the last rays of the setting sun and shimmering with an ethereal glow. The golden light danced across her features, softening the edges and highlighting the innocence that had been hidden beneath the cursed form. Her eyes, no longer filled with an otherworldly and terrifying glow, now shimmered with a complex mixture of emotions. They were deep pools of mahogany brown, reflecting years of pain, longing, and a newfound hope. The depth of feeling in those eyes was almost palpable, telling a story of a soul trapped between two worlds, yearning for peace yet bound by an unbreakable promise. Rika's small form seemed both fragile and strong, a paradox that perfectly encapsulated her existence. Her delicate hands were clasped in her lap, fingers intertwined as if holding onto a secret. The tattered edges of her white dress fluttered gently in the breeze, a stark contrast to the destruction that surrounded them. The air around them seemed to hold its breath, charged with an energy that was both comforting and melancholic. It was as if the very atmosphere recognized the significance of this moment, this transformation. The fading sunlight cast long shadows across the broken concrete, creating a surreal backdrop for this poignant scene. "Rika-chan," Izuku said, his voice barely above a whisper. Izuku found himself unable to look away, mesmerized by the girl before him. He could see traces of the cursed spirit she had been, but now those traces were overshadowed by the pure, innocent soul that had always been at her core. A lump formed in his throat as he realized the weight of his promise, the magnitude of what it meant not just for him, but for Rika as well. From the gaping hole in the wall, a figure emerged, his entrance as dramatic as it was unexpected. "Congratulations, you managed to break the curse." A smooth, confident voice rang out, accompanied by the sound of slow, deliberate clapping. The group turned as one, their eyes widening in surprise and confusion. There, striding through the debris with an air of casual elegance, was a man they had never seen before, or at least never seen quite like this. Gone were the familiar bandages and dark glasses that usually obscured his features. Instead, they were faced with a visage that was as striking as it was unfamiliar. Piercing blue eyes, framed by long lashes, surveyed the scene with a mixture of amusement and pride. A shock of unruly white hair caught the fading sunlight, giving him an almost ethereal appearance. Izuku, Maki, Panda, and Inumaki stared at the newcomer, their expressions a comical mix of shock and bewilderment. The tension of the previous moment seemed to evaporate, replaced by a collective sense of confusion. "Who are you?" Izuku, Maki, and Panda blurted out in unison, their voices a chorus of disbelief. The man's lips curled into a smirk, his eyes twinkling with mischief. He struck a pose, one hand on his hip, the other dramatically sweeping his hair back. "I'm your good-looking sensei, Satoru Gojo," he announced, his voice dripping with self-assurance. The revelation hung in the air for a moment, the students processing this new information. Inumaki's eyes widened behind his bandages, while Panda's jaw dropped open in a comical display of surprise. Maki was the first to recover, her eyes narrowing. "Sensei?" she repeated, her tone skeptical. "But you look so different." Gojo's smirk widened into a full-blown grin. "What? Did you think I wore those bandages in battle just to fashion?" he quipped, running a hand through his hair. "Though I must say, they do add a certain air of mystery." Izuku, still reeling from the events of the day, couldn't help but let out a nervous laugh. "Gojo-sensei," he began, his voice tinged with a mixture of relief and confusion. You've been here the whole time?" "Nope, just got here," Gojo replied, his piercing blue eyes twinkling with a mixture of mischief and excitement. He ran a hand through his unruly white hair, causing it to stick up even more dramatically. A smirk played on his lips as he surveyed the group before him. "That theory you had, Izuku? I found it intriguing, so I ordered an investigation into your ancestors. We finished looking into Rika's background a while ago, but there was merit in digging into yours as well." He paused for dramatic effect, his grin widening as he noticed the anticipation building in his students' eyes. The tension in the air was palpable, and Gojo seemed to revel in it. "And lo and behold, you wouldn't believe what we found out." Izuku leaned forward, his teal eyes wide with curiosity. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, a nervous habit he'd never quite shaken. The others, too, seemed to hold their breath in anticipation. Even Panda, usually so jovial, was uncharacteristically still. "You, my dear student," Gojo continued, pointing at Izuku with a flourish worthy of a stage magician, "are a descendant of none other than Sugawara no Michizane." His voice rose with excitement as he delivered the news. Then, with a playful wink that seemed to light up his entire face, he added, "Which means, you're a super distant relative of mine." The revelation hung in the air for a moment, heavy with implications. Then, As if a dam had broken, chaos erupted. "Suga!" Panda and Maki exclaimed in unison, their voices a mixture of disbelief and awe. Panda's fuzzy eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into his forehead, while Maki's glasses slipped down her nose in her shock. Izuku, however, looked puzzled. His brow furrowed, creating a small crease between his eyebrows. "Who's that?" he asked, his voice tinged with confusion and a hint of embarrassment at his lack of knowledge. The others turned to him, surprise evident on their faces. Even Inumaki's eyes widened behind his bandages, his usually stoic demeanor cracking slightly. "You don't know?" Panda asked, his voice rising in pitch with his shock. He waved his furry arms about as if trying to physically grasp the concept of Izuku's ignorance. "He was a super big-time shaman." Maki put her glasses back on and adjusted, pushing them back up her nose with a practiced motion. Her voice took on a lecturing tone, reminiscent of a seasoned professor addressing a classroom. "Sugawara no Michizane is known as one of the 3 greatest Japanese vengeful spirits," she explained, her eyes gleaming with the excitement of sharing knowledge. "He was a scholar and politician in the Heian period who was exiled due to false accusations. After his death, his angry spirit was said to cause natural disasters until he was appeased and deified." "Tuna," Inumaki added solemnly, nodding his head as if he had contributed something profound to the conversation. The others glanced at him, momentarily bemused by his non sequitur, before turning their attention back to Gojo. Gojo's expression softened as he looked at Izuku, his voice becoming more serious. The playful glint in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a look of compassion and understanding. "You were right, Izuku. Rika didn't curse you. You were the one who cursed her." Those words hit Izuku like a physical blow. He stumbled back a step, his mind reeling as the implications sank in. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, and he felt as if the ground beneath his feet had suddenly become unstable. "So that's why my younger self said it was our fault," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. His eyes glazed over as memories flooded his consciousness, vivid and painful. In his mind's eye, he saw his 10-year-old self kneeling beside Rika's limp form. The scene played out with crystal clarity, as if he were reliving it in that very moment. "Rika-chan, what do I do?" Young Izuku cried, his small hands shaking as he reached out to her. Tears streamed down his freckled cheeks, leaving glistening trails in their wake. "Is she going to die? I have to help her." Panic set in, his young voice cracking with emotion. "You can't die. You can't die. You can't die," he repeated frantically, his young mind unable to process the tragedy unfolding before him. Back in the present, Izuku's hair fell forward, shadowing his eyes. His shoulders slumped as the weight of realization settled upon them. "Yes, that time, I was rejecting Rika-chan's death," he murmured, the words barely audible but filled with the weight of understanding. Gojo's voice cut through Izuku's thoughts, bringing him back to the present. His tone was gentle but firm, like a lifeline thrown to someone adrift at sea. "The one who established the curse just revoked the master and servant status," he explained, his blue eyes fixed on Izuku with unwavering intensity. "If the curse doesn't desire to lay any punishment, then the dispel is complete. And you can tell just by looking at her." Izuku's gaze shifted to Rika, taking in her transformed appearance. The innocence and purity radiating from her small form were a stark contrast to the cursed spirit she had been moments ago. The weight of his actions crashed down upon him, and he felt his knees weaken. Making Rika-chan take that form, hurting so many people because Ghetto was targeting me. Izuku's voice trembled, tears cascading down his freckled cheeks like a summer rain. His words came out in broken gasps, each one a struggle against the tide of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. The weight of realization pressed down on his shoulders, making him feel smaller than ever before. So many people almost died. It's all my fault." He crumpled to the ground, his knees hitting the rough concrete with a dull thud. His hands flew to his head, fingers tangling in his messy green hair as sobs racked his body. The others watched in stunned silence, the air heavy with shared sorrow. Maki's glasses fogged up slightly, and even Panda's usually jovial demeanor was subdued. Inumaki stood still, his bandaged hands clenched at his sides. Suddenly, a warmth enveloped Izuku. Rika had moved to him, her small arms wrapping around his shaking form. Her touch was gentle and comforting, like a soft blanket on a cold night. The scent of cherry blossoms seemed to surround them, a phantom reminder of happier days. Her voice, soft and filled with affection, reached his ears, cutting through the storm of his emotions like a ray of sunlight through dark clouds. "Thank you, Izuku," she said, her words filled with genuine gratitude. They rang with a clarity that seemed to still the very air around them, making even the gentle rustling of debris cease for a moment. "For always giving me time, for always being beside me. During these 6 years, I've been happier than when I was alive." She pulled back slightly, meeting his tear-filled eyes with a gentle smile that seemed to hold all the warmth of the setting sun. Her spectral form shimmered slightly, catching the fading light in a way that made her appear almost ethereal. "Bye-bye, be well, and don't come here too fast, okay?" Izuku nodded, unable to form words through his tears. His throat felt tight, constricted by emotion, as if all the words he wanted to say were stuck there. "Okay," he finally managed to choke out, the single word carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises. His hand reached out instinctively as if trying to hold on to her for just a moment longer. "See you," Rika whispered, smiling at him as her form began to shimmer and fade. Slowly, she dissolved into particles of golden light, drifting upwards like fireflies on a summer evening. Each mote of light seemed to carry with it a fragment of memory, of love, of the bond they had shared. Some took the shape of tiny butterflies, others like twinkling stars. The air around them filled with a soft, warm glow, as if the very essence of Rika's spirit was embracing them one last time. As Rika disappeared, the atmosphere shifted palpably. The heaviness that had weighed upon them for so long seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of bittersweet release. The fading sunlight cast long shadows across the rubble-strewn ground, painting the scene in a tapestry of orange and gold. The broken concrete and twisted metal were transformed, their jagged edges softened by the ethereal light, creating an almost surreal landscape. A gentle breeze stirred, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings and the bittersweet scent of farewells. It whispered through the debris, stirring up small eddies of dust that danced in the golden light. Tiny fragments of paper, perhaps from destroyed buildings, fluttered in the air like confetti. The wind caressed Izuku's face, drying the tears on his cheeks and ruffling his hair as if nature itself was offering comfort. Izuku stood there, his teal eyes fixed on the spot where Rika had vanished. His heart felt both lighter and heavier at the same time, a paradox of emotion that left him breathless. The warmth of Rika's final embrace still lingered on his skin, a phantom touch that he knew he would carry with him always. He could almost hear the echo of her laughter and see the ghost of her smile in the fading light. "Thank you, Rika," Izuku said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words seemed inadequate to express the depth of his gratitude and the complexity of his emotions. Yet in their simplicity, they carried the weight of years of shared experiences, of pain and joy, of a bond that transcended the boundaries between life and death. His hand reached out, fingers splayed as if trying to touch the last traces of golden light. As the last motes of golden light faded into the twilight sky, Izuku felt a shift within himself. The burden of guilt he had carried for so long began to ease, replaced by a sense of purpose. He straightened his back, his fists clenching at his sides. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in years, he felt truly ready to face it. The setting sun cast long shadows, but to Izuku, they no longer seemed ominous. Instead, they stretched before him like a path, leading towards a future full of possibilities. Time skip, snowflakes danced delicately through the air, blanketing the landscape in a pristine layer of white. The enchanting scene unfolded at Jujutsu High, where the tranquil beauty of winter transformed the campus into a serene wonderland. As the snow settled on the rooftops and clung to the branches of the trees, the tranquil atmosphere invited students to pause and appreciate the quiet charm of the season. The gentle hush of the falling snow created a magical ambience, making it a perfect day for reflection and camaraderie among the students. Izuku and Gojo walked side by side through the snow-covered grounds, their footsteps leaving a trail of impressions behind them. Izuku was bundled up against the cold in a dark blue zip-up jacket with a high collar that protected his neck from the biting wind. His slim-fit black pants and sturdy black dress boots completed his winter ensemble, while a soft scarf was wrapped snugly around his neck. Over his shoulder, he carried a bag containing his katana, its weight a constant reminder of his training and responsibilities. As they walked, Gojo turned to Izuku, his usually playful demeanor tinged with seriousness. "You know, Izuku," he began, his breath forming small clouds in the frosty air. "It might be late for this, but Ghetto's actions weren't your fault. He would have come to the college whether you were here or not." Izuku's teal eyes flickered with a mix of emotions: guilt, uncertainty, and a glimmer of hope. "Really now?" he murmured, his voice barely audible over the soft crunch of snow beneath their feet. Gojo's face broke into a grin, the seriousness melting away like snow in sunlight. "Besides, look at this," he exclaimed, producing something from his pocket with a flourish. In his gloved hand, he held Izuku's student ID. Izuku's eyes widened in surprise. "Ah, my student ID," he exclaimed, reaching out to take it. "Did you find it, sensei?" Gojo's grin widened, his blue eyes twinkling with mischief behind his ever-present sunglasses. "Nah, wasn't me," he said, handing over the ID. "It was my best friend, the only one I have." Before Izuku could ponder the meaning behind Gojo's words, a familiar voice cut through the crisp winter air. "Hey Izuku, how long are you gonna make us wait?" Maki's impatient shout rang out across the snowy courtyard. She stood a short distance away, her breath visible in the cold air, hands on her hips in a pose of mock annoyance. Next to her, Inumaki stood silently, his eyes peering out from behind his face wrappings, while Panda, decked out in a bright yellow jacket that stood out starkly against the white backdrop, waved enthusiastically. "Let's go," Maki called out again, her tone softening slightly as she saw Izuku and Gojo approach. A warm smile spread across Izuku's face as he looked at his friends. Despite the cold, he felt warmth spreading through his chest. These people, who had stood by him through thick and thin and helped him grow and learn, were more than just classmates or fellow students. As he joined the group, his gaze dropped momentarily to his hand, where a simple ring adorned his finger. It was more than just jewelry. It was a symbol of his next great challenge, his next step forward. "Yue," Izuku thought, his heart swelling with determination and anticipation. "Here I come." With that thought, he stepped forward to join his friends, ready to face whatever the future might hold. The snow continued to fall gently around them, a silent witness to the bonds of friendship and the promise of new beginnings. To be continued. End credit scene. 1 year later, Africa, Mahaha Missouri restaurant. The bustling streets of Nairobi, Kenya, pulsed with life under the scorching African sun. Amidst the vibrant tapestry of sights, sounds, and smells, a humble restaurant stood out, Mahaha Missouri. Its red clay brick walls, weathered by time and the elements, whispered stories of countless meals shared and friendships forged. A metal roof glinted like a beacon in the sunlight, while intricately carved wooden frames adorned the windows, showcasing the artistry of local craftsmanship. A small porch out front, complete with a pair of well-worn rocking chairs, invited passersby to pause and rest. As dusk approached, a string of fairy lights zigzagging above the door began to twinkle, promising warmth and comfort to all who entered. Inside, seated at a rustic wooden table, were two unlikely companions, one of Japanese descent and the other African. The younger of the two, a 17-year-old Izuku, savored a plate of traditional Kenyan cuisine. His appearance had changed significantly over the past year. Long, black curly hair with striking green highlights framed his face, styled in curtain bangs that lent him an air of both mystery and approachability. He wore a crisp white uniform jacket, its sleeves rolled up to his forearms to combat the heat, paired with slender black pants that tucked neatly into matching white sneakers. "This is incredible, Miguel-san," Izuku enthused, his teal eyes sparkling with delight as he took another bite. The flavors danced on his tongue, a perfect blend of spices and textures he had never experienced before. Miguel, his companion, was a stark contrast to the slender Japanese youth. A tall, heavily muscled African man, Miguel's eyes and hair were obscured by accessories. Armless sunglasses shielded his gaze, while a large, puffy beret-style hat perched atop his head. His thin lips quirked into a smile at Izuku's enthusiasm, and the light caught on the hoop earrings adorning his large ears. "Isn't it just?" Miguel replied, his deep voice filled with pride. "The secret is a spice called Roiko. It's like magic powder. Add it to anything, and suddenly it tastes authentically Kenyan. He paused, taking a sip of his drink before his tone shifted to something more serious. More importantly, they went home, right? Izuku nodded, his expression sobering slightly. Yeah, they did. Good, Miguel grunted, seemingly satisfied with the brief answer. Izuku's face brightened again as he took another bite. You know, this reminds me a bit of nikujiga, a Japanese dish. The flavors are different, of course, but something is comforting about it that feels familiar. Miguel opened his mouth to respond, but his words died on his lips as his gaze fixed on a point over Izuku's shoulder. His posture stiffened, alerting Izuku to the change. What's wrong? Izuku asked, concern creeping into his voice. Miguel's response was terse. What are you doing here? Confused, Izuku turned in his seat, his eyes widening in recognition. Gojo-sensei, standing before them, looking as nonchalant as ever in a white shirt, black pants, and his signature blue-tinted glasses, was Satoru Gojo. His wild white hair seemed to defy gravity, and a lazy smile played on his lips. Hey, kid, Gojo drawled, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. Long time no see. I'm here to cash in a favor for Nizu. His gaze swept over Izuku, taking in the changes in his former student. We're going back to Japan. The simple statement hung in the air, heavy with implications. Izuku felt a surge of mixed emotions, excitement, apprehension, and a touch of nostalgia. His time in Africa had been transformative, but Japan was where it all began. Japan, Sir Nitai's agency. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Sir Nitai's agency, casting elongated shadows that danced across the polished wooden floor. The warm, golden light enveloped the room, creating a cozy, inviting atmosphere. In a small, meticulously organized space within the agency, a girl stood quietly, lost in thought. Her long, flowing platinum blonde hair shimmered like spun silver in the sunlight, framing a face that was both youthful and bright, with striking blue eyes filled with a combination of excitement and longing. Kaori, as she was named, clutched a photograph gently in her hands. Her fingers were delicate as they traced the outlines of the figures captured within the image. It was a family portrait of the Yagi family, but her gaze was irresistibly drawn to one face in particular, the young boy with messy black hair and a sprinkle of freckles across his cheeks. The vibrant expression on his face radiated a joy that seemed almost palpable. Izuku Ne-chan, she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. The name held a weight of anticipation and affection. She couldn't help but let a smile tug at her lips as she envisioned finally meeting him. Thoughts raced through her mind, filled with questions about how he had grown and changed since that moment was frozen in time. Kaori's eyes drank in every detail of Izuku's face, memorizing the curve of his bright smile and the way his vibrant eyes sparkled with determination. She found herself daydreaming about what he must be like now, how he had tackled the challenges that life threw at him, how he had blossomed into the person he was destined to be. Kaori! A voice called from somewhere outside the room, jolting her back to reality. Coming, she answered, reluctantly pulling her gaze away from the photograph. A sense of reluctance settled in her heart, as though leaving that moment behind felt akin to parting from a beloved friend. Before she stepped out, Kaori carefully placed the picture on her bed, smoothing out a slightly curled corner with tender care. Her fingers lingered on the frame for a fleeting moment, as if to offer a silent promise. See you possibly at UA, she murmured to herself, a hopeful smile playing on her lips. The thought of meeting Izuku at the prestigious UA High School, a place renowned for shaping the heroes of tomorrow, was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. With one last longing glance at the photograph, Kaori turned toward the door, her heart beating with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. As she stepped out of her room, she inhaled deeply, squaring her shoulders with resolve. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles she might encounter, the hope of finally connecting with her brother gave her an unshakable strength. With renewed determination burning in her chest, she strode down the hallway, ready to face whatever awaited her at Sir Nitai's agency. That's a wrap, Legends. Part 3 of What If Deku Had Yuta's Abilities was pure fire, and we're just getting started. A massive thanks again to ＤISCLAIMER for the incredible collaboration. Be sure to show them some love. Don't forget to hit like, share the video, and help us reach that 100 like goal for the next part. Subscribe if you haven't already so you never miss out on this epic series. Until next time, stay legendary, and I'll see you in the next one.